In the void before time, the being known as the Father dreamed existence into being. First among his thoughts was Davoth, a reflection of the Creator himself, given dominion over a realm of perfect possibility. This was the first creation, a prototype universe where Davoth ruled as a lesser god, tasked with shepherding life in the image of his maker. Yet in this primordial epoch, the seeds of cosmic tragedy were already sown. The realm of Davoth flourished beneath twin suns of ambition and potential. His creatures evolved with remarkable speed, civilizations rising across landscapes of impossible beauty. The Father watched as his first creation demonstrated profound mastery over the forces of existence, matter, energy, and the fundamental building blocks of reality bent to Davoth's will. Cities of crystal and light stretched across continents. Beings of near-divine intellect contemplated the mysteries of creation while their maker looked on with pride. But it was not enough. Davoth's ambitions exceeded the boundaries the Father had established. His creation had been granted dominion over all things, save one, the power to bestow true immortality upon his subjects. This singular limitation festered in Davoth's consciousness like a wound that would not heal. He watched as his beloved creations withered and died despite his mastery of all other forces. This perceived betrayal transformed admiration into resentment, devotion into defiance. The Father observed this corruption taking root and made his judgment. Davoth's realm was flawed, a failed experiment that could not be permitted to continue. What the Father had given, he now reclaimed. The prototype universe was unmade, its energies harvested to forge a new and perfect creation. Urdak rose from the ashes of Davoth's domain, and with it the Maker's beings of pure light granted the very immortality that Davoth had been denied. Betrayal begat betrayal. The Father cast Davoth down, stripping him of his divine form and imprisoning what remained in a sphere of perfect darkness. This prison, this hell, became Davoth's kingdom, a shadowed reflection of what he had lost. The Father's final act of cruelty was perhaps his most profound. He left Davoth with his memories intact. The fallen creator remembered paradise and understood precisely what had been taken from him. For eons, Davoth raged against his confinement, his hatred crystallizing into purpose. The sphere of darkness responded to his will, warping and expanding to reflect his growing malice. Mountains of bone erupted from plains of fire. Oceans of blood churned beneath skies, veiled in ash and shadow. Hell was born not from divine plan, but from the concentrated essence of betrayal and rage, a dark mirror of creation itself. In his isolation, Davoth discovered that the Father's judgment had been imperfect. Fragments of the unmade realm had survived broken shards of civilizations, twisted echoes of beings that once walked in light. These remnants drifted into Davoth's sphere of influence, drawn by his indomitable will. The first demons were not created but salvaged broken things, reassembled with hatred as their mortar. The unnamed city arose first among Hell's dominions, built by these salvaged beings who retained fractured memories of their former glory. Its architecture defied reason, spires of flesh and metal reaching toward a sky that offered no redemption. Within its twisted streets, the first hierarchies of Hell took shape. The strong consumed the weak. The cunning subjugated the strong. And above them all, Davoth watched and guided, no longer a god of light, but a lord of shadow. As Hell expanded, it encountered boundaries, membranes where Davoth's realm pressed against other dimensions. These were not barriers, but opportunities. The first incursions were tentative, whispers that found resonance in the darkest corners of mortal minds, subtle corruptions that spread like contagion through dreams and desires. Davoth discovered that sin was a gateway, a weakness in reality's architecture that his influence could exploit. The first world to fall was not conquered, but seduced. Its name has been purged from all records, known now only as the Damned Realm. Its people were anatomists of pleasure who built temples to sensation and excess. When suffering became the only sensation they had not mastered, Hell offered new frontiers of experience. They carved sigils of invitation into their flesh, opened their veins in ceremonial circles, and chanted names that human tongues were never meant to pronounce. The barriers thinned, reality shuddered, and Hell claimed its first tribute. Davoth walked among the ruins of this civilization, studying the transformation with clinical precision. The people had become something new, neither mortal nor truly demonic, but vessels through which Hell's essence could flow. Their cities sank beneath the surface of their world, pulled into Hell's expanding dominion. Their knowledge was absorbed, their technologies repurposed, their very souls rendered into raw material for Davoth's growing ambitions. This pattern repeated across countless realms. Some fell through weakness, others through deliberate invitation. Each absorption strengthened Hell and expanded its influence. Davoth learned that mortal sin was more than merely a gateway. It was a resource that could be harvested, refined, and weaponized. The energies released through corruption and suffering proved to be the perfect counterbalance to the Father's light. Thus began the systematic cultivation of damnation. Hell evolved from prison to empire, developing complex systems for the processing of corrupted worlds. The first Hell priests emerged from among those who willingly surrendered their realms, rewarded with positions of authority in the infernal hierarchy. Under their guidance, great temples were constructed where the boundaries between dimensions could be ritually weakened. The age of consumption lasted for uncounted millennia. Hell grew not through random acquisition, but through deliberate design. Davoth, once a creator of life, applied his divine knowledge to the architecture of suffering. The geography of Hell reflected this purpose, a vast machine disguised as a realm, with each region specialized for specific aspects of soul processing and energy extraction. The plains of Necrovol became the industrial heart of this machine. Here, massive factories converted the essence of damned souls into raw power that fueled Hell's expansion. Tortured spirits were not merely punished, but rendered into a resource more precious than any material wealth. Their suffering became energy. Their memories became knowledge. Their very identities were ultimately consumed, leaving only hollow vessels to be repurposed for Hell's armies. It was in this era that the first true demons emerged, beings born of Hell, rather than claimed from other realms. These creatures were manifestations of specific sins or corruptions, their forms dictated by their function within the infernal ecosystem. The imps, with their fire-casting abilities, served as harbingers and infiltrators. The Hell Knights embodied martial strength perverted to cruelty. The cacodemons drifted through Hell's skies like bloated sentinels, drawn to psychic anguish as moths to flame. Above these lesser demons rose the archdemons, powerful entities that served as extensions of Davoth's will across his growing dominion. Each commanded legions and oversaw vast territories, but none challenged the authority of the Dark Lord himself. They were not merely servants, but aspects of Davoth's multifaceted rage, specialized instruments for different methods of corruption and conquest. The first Titan was born during this period of expansion, a mountain of flesh and hatred that served as both weapon and world engine. These colossal beings could tear through the fabric of reality with their mere presence, creating persistent breaches through which Hell's influence could pour unimpeded. They were living siege weapons, each one capable of overwhelming an entire civilization's defenses. As his power grew, Davoth's form evolved to reflect his true nature. No longer bound by the limitations the Father had imposed, he shed the last vestiges of his original appearance. The Dark Lord emerged a being of terrible majesty, whose very presence caused reality to bow before him. In this perfected form, with his legions assembled and his realm secured, Davoth turned his gaze upward toward Urdak and the betrayer who had cast him down. The corroded tablets, Hell's oldest surviving records, speak of this moment as the ascension of the Dark One. Davoth gathered the energies harvested from countless corrupted souls and forged them into a crown of fire that could rival the Father's own power. With this symbol of authority upon his brow, he established the infernal hierarchy that would govern Hell's operations across all dimensions and epochs. At the pinnacle stood Davoth himself, the prime evil and architect of damnation. Below him, the Council of Archdemons administered his will through specialized domains of corruption. The Hell Priests served as diplomats and infiltrators, seeking new realms to seduce into Hell's embrace. The Titans were the ultimate weapons, deployed only when a civilization proved resistant to more subtle methods of corruption. And the countless hordes of lesser demons served as foot soldiers in an endless campaign against creation itself. With the hierarchy established, Davoth unveiled his ultimate ambition to his assembled court, a plan so audacious that even the archdemons trembled before it. Hell would not merely continue to consume random worlds and opportunistic conquests. It would systematically undermine the entirety of the Father's creation. It would spread corruption through every dimension, harvest every soul, and ultimately challenge Urdak itself. This was not merely revenge, it was rectification. Davoth did not seek to destroy creation, but to reclaim it, to prove that his vision had been superior all along. The immortality denied to his original realm would be achieved through different means. If the Father would not grant eternal life freely, then Davoth would forge it in the crucible of suffering and conquest. The blood temples were consecrated across Hell's dominion, each one a nexus where the barriers between dimensions grew thin. Within these unholy sanctuaries, ritual sacrifices created persistent breaches that allowed Hell's influence to seep into untouched realms. The first systematic incursions began no longer opportunistic corruptions, but calculated campaigns of interdimensional conquest. It was during this expansion that Hell first encountered resistance worthy of note. Not all civilizations succumbed easily to corruption. Some possessed their own divine protectors, sacred technologies, or simply an incorruptible will to resist. These obstacles fascinated Davoth, who studied each resistance with the detachment of a scientist examining an unexpected reaction. The War of the First Seal marks the earliest recorded instance of organized opposition to Hell's advance. A coalition of 13 dimensions united under the banner of a being known only as the Gatekeeper. This entity possessed knowledge of Hell's true nature and the methods to repel its influence. Under the Gatekeeper's guidance, the 13 realms constructed a network of warding towers that effectively blocked Hell's incursions for nearly 1,000 years. Davoth's response was not rage, but adaptation. If direct corruption proved impossible, there were always subtler routes. The Dark Lord dispatched his most insidious servants not to attack the wards but to undermine the alliance that maintained them. Seeds of discord were planted. Ancient rivalries were inflamed. Suspicions were nurtured until they blossomed into open conflict. The coalition fractured from within. The wards fell into disrepair, and Hell claimed 13 realms in a single day of slaughter that became known as the Harvest of Seals. The Gatekeeper was captured, not killed, and brought before Davoth himself. What transpired in that audience chamber remains unknown, but the being who had once unified dimensions against Hell emerged as the first Khan Maker, a harbinger of what was to come. This victory marked Hell's transition from opportunistic predator to methodical conqueror. Davoth had proven that no defense was impregnable, no alliance unbreakable, no soul ultimately incorruptible. The systems refined through this conflict became the foundation for all future campaigns. Hell would not merely consume, it would study, adapt, and overcome through patience spanning eons if necessary. As Hell's boundaries expanded, Davoth made a discovery that altered the course of his grand design. At the edges of his domain, where reality grew thin and malleable, he glimpsed something that should have been impossible. Urdak, the shining realm of the Makers, created from the energies stolen from his original domain. More significantly, he witnessed the Father's new chosen instruments, the Makers themselves, beings granted the immortality that had been denied to Davoth's own creations. The revelation ignited new purpose in the Dark Lord. His campaign was no longer merely about expansion or even revenge. It became a sacred mission to reclaim what had been stolen, not just power or dominion, but the fundamental right to create true, undying life. If the Father would not grant this power willingly, then Hell would grow strong enough to take it by force. The Unholy Codex was inscribed during this period, a living document, written in blood on pages of flayed reality. Within its contents, Davoth outlined the doctrine that would guide Hell's operations across all dimensions and epochs. The Codex was not merely a strategic plan, but a Davoth perversion of divine law, establishing the principles through which corruption could undermine the Father's creation from within. Central to this doctrine was the concept of the soul extraction, the process by which mortal energies could be harvested and transformed into power for Hell's machine. The Codex detailed specific methodologies for different types of souls, recognizing that the essence of a warrior differed from that of a scholar, a tyrant, or a saint. Each required specialized processing to maximize the energy yield. The industrialization of damnation reached its apex with the construction of the Necrovol Prime, the greatest of Hell's soul factories. This massive complex could process entire civilizations, rendering their collective spiritual energy into forms that could fuel Hell's most ambitious projects. The architecture of Necrovol Prime reflected its function, a monument to methodical suffering where pain was not merely inflicted but refined to its purest expression. As the mechanisms of Hell reached perfection, Davoth turned his attention to more specialized creations. The first Marauders were forged during this era, elite warriors who combined demonic power with tactical intelligence. Unlike the mindless hordes that formed the bulk of Hell's armies, the Marauders could infiltrate resistant civilizations, analyze their defenses, and systematically dismantle them from within. The Hell Priests evolved from administrators to active agents of corruption, each developing specialized methods of subversion tailored to different types of societies. The Deeg Order emerged as the most effective of these priesthoods, perfecting the art of manipulating mortal religious institutions into unwitting servants of Hell's agenda. Through subtle doctrinal corruptions, they could transform centers of faith into gateways for demonic influence. Thus was established the foundation of Hell's eternal machine, a self-sustaining empire built upon the systematic processing of corrupted souls and conquered dimensions. What had begun as a prison imposed by the Father had become a rival creation with its own terrible purpose. Davoth, once merely a fallen creator, had transformed himself into the Dark Lord of a realm that threatened the very foundations of existence. From his throne of fused bone and black metal, Davoth gazed upon his domain and saw that it was incomplete. The edifice of suffering he had constructed was but a means to an end, a weapon forged for the ultimate confrontation with the Father and his favored creation, Urdak. The next phase would require new strategies, new corruptions, and ultimately, new betrayals. As the first age of Hell's dominion reached its completion, the Dark Lord summoned his council and revealed the next stage of his grand design. The conquest of random dimensions would continue, but Hell's true focus would shift toward a single objective, finding a path to Urdak and the secrets of true creation it contained. This crusade would consume eons and devour countless civilizations before reaching its terrible fulfillment. And so the age of the infernal Genesis concluded not with an ending, but with a dark promise, a covenant between Davoth and the empire of damnation he had forged from his own betrayal. Hell would continue to expand until it encompassed all of existence. It would corrupt and consume until nothing remained of the Father's creation except what Hell chose to preserve. And ultimately, it would ascend to replace the divine order itself. The machine was built, the armies were assembled, the doctrine was established. Now began the great corruption that would challenge the foundations of reality itself. From the depths of betrayal rose an empire unlike any other, not built upon light or creation, but upon consumption and transformation. The Dark Lord Davoth, now fully embracing his role as Hell's sovereign architect, turned his attention from mere existence toward expansion. No longer content with the borders of his shadowed realm, he crafted the foundations of a machine that would ultimately challenge creation itself. The forging of the infernal hierarchies marked the beginning of Hell's true ascension. What had been chaotic suffering became ordered torment. What had been mindless destruction became purposeful harvest. The Dark Lord understood that to rival the Father's creation, his domain would require structure, a terrible symmetry that could process reality itself into fuel for his ambitions. Necrovol rose first among Hell's great works, its spires of fused bone and black metal stretching towards skies that bled perpetual twilight. Not merely a citadel, but a vast mechanism, its architecture was designed for a single purpose: the systematic extraction of essence from corrupted souls. Within its labyrinthine chambers, the first Hell Priests perfected the alchemy of spiritual refinement, transforming terror, agony, and despair into energy that could fuel Hell's expansion. The Hell Priests were not demons, but willful converts beings who had once served other purposes in other realms before pledging themselves to Davoth's vision. Each underwent a transformation that preserved their intellect while purging any capacity for mercy or redemption. Their flesh became vessels for Hell's power, their minds repositories for forbidden knowledge that mortal dimensions had spent eons trying to forget. Beneath their guidance, Hell developed technologies that defied conventional understanding. Not machines as mortal science conceived them, but hybridizations of flesh, soul, and malice that pulsed with terrible purpose. The soul spires of Necrovol could extract and categorize the spiritual essence of entire civilizations. The blood temples served as nexus points where the barriers between dimensions grew thin enough for Hell's influence to seep outward like a creeping contagion. Daveth watched these developments with cold satisfaction. The betrayal that had birthed his realm now fueled its evolution into something the Father could never have anticipated, a rival creation with its own terrible purpose. The Dark Lord would not merely survive in his prison, he would transform it into a throne, from which he could ultimately challenge heaven itself. The creation of the first Titan represented a significant evolution in Hell's capacity for conquest. Standing taller than mountains, forged from the combined essence of countless tortured souls, these entities were living weapons capable of tearing through the fabric of reality. The Titan of Imora was the first and greatest of these behemoths, its very heartbeat sending tremors through dimensions that had not yet learned to fear Hell's touch. Where the Titan walked, reality shuddered. Dimensional barriers weakened in its presence, allowing lesser demons to pour through like a tide of corruption into previously untouched realms. Civilizations that might have resisted conventional invasions found themselves overwhelmed as their very laws of physics collapsed under the Titan's tread. Those who survived the initial incursion were harvested, their souls transported to Necrovol for processing, their worlds absorbed into Hell's expanding dominion. This pattern breach, conquest, harvest, absorption, became the fundamental cycle of Hell's growth. Each consumed world added to Hell's power. Each processed civilization contributed knowledge and energy that could be directed toward the next campaign. The Dark Lord observed this machine with the detachment of a scientist studying a particularly efficient reaction. His creation was self-sustaining, converting opposition into fuel with perfect economy. The blood temples represented the next innovation in Hell's expanding influence. These structures were not merely built, but grown living cathedrals of twisted flesh and pulsing organs that served as permanent anchors for Hell's presence in conquered dimensions. Within their sanctums, sacrificial rites maintained breaches in reality through which demons could freely pass, establishing footholds that would eventually consume entire worlds. Deeg priests administered these temples, their orders expanding to include specialized roles for different aspects of corruption and conquest. The Deeg Grav specialized in the manipulation of physical laws, creating conditions where reality itself would fatigue and ultimately fracture. The Deeg Nilox perfected the art of doctrinal corruption, transforming mortal faiths into unwitting gateways for demonic influence. The Deeg Renak developed the alchemy of biological perversion, creating plagues that prepared mortal flesh for demonic possession. Under their combined guidance, Hell's methods of conquest diversified. Some civilizations fell through direct invasion, others through gradual corruption, still others through carefully orchestrated self-destruction. The Deeg Order maintained archives documenting the specific methodologies that proved most effective against different types of societies, compiling a comprehensive taxonomy of corruption that left no form of existence immune to Hell's touch. The Hell Crucible emerged as the central mechanism for this expanding empire, not a physical location, but a self-perpetuating cycle of energy extraction and utilization. Souls harvested from conquered realms fueled the creation of new demons and the opening of new portals, which in turn facilitated the conquest of additional dimensions whose souls would continue the cycle. This machine did not merely sustain Hell's operations, it ensured exponential growth across epochs of expansion. From this crucible emerged new forms of demonic life, each specialized for specific functions within Hell's ecosystem. The lesser demons served as the foundation. Imps, Hell Knights, and Pinkies formed the bulk of invasion forces, their simple brutality sufficient for most conquests. The greater demons Barons, Mancubi, and Arachnotrons directed these hordes with cruel intelligence, adapting strategies to overcome specific resistances. Above them all, the archdemons commanded entire campaigns, their power approaching that of demigods in mortal realms. The ambient energy of Hell itself evolved during this period of expansion. What had begun as formless malice crystallized into argent energy, a hybridization of mortal suffering and demonic power that could be harvested, refined, and weaponized. This terrible innovation represented Hell's most significant achievement, the ability to convert spiritual corruption into practical power that could challenge the fundamental forces of creation. Argent energy became the lifeblood of Hell's empire, flowing through dimensional breaches, empowering demonic forms, and fueling technologies that defied comprehension. Its corrupting influence spread even to realms not yet directly conquered, seeping through reality's thin places like radiation from a malignant star. Exposure to raw argent transformed mortal flesh and warped mortal minds, preparing entire populations for eventual harvesting even before Hell's armies physically breached their worlds. The Dark Lord recognized in argent energy an echo of the creative power he had once wielded, not pure creation, but a shadow reflection powerful enough to potentially challenge the Father's work. This discovery fueled Davoth's growing obsession with reclaiming what had been taken from him. If he could not create life as he once had, he would forge a power great enough to take by force what had been denied by divine decree. The first experiments in demonic evolution began in the depths of Emora, where the Dark Lord's personal sanctum housed his most ambitious works. Here, Davoth applied the principles of creation he remembered from his time as the Father's first thought, now corrupted and twisted toward new purpose. The results were the Praetor's elite demons that combined the raw power of Hell's essence with intelligence and adaptability previously unknown among the infernal ranks. Unlike lesser demons, the Praetors retained individual consciousness and the capacity for strategic thought. They could analyze opposition, adapt to resistance, and implement complex battle plans that transformed Hell's conquests from chaotic rampages into methodical campaigns. Under their direction, Hell's armies developed formations and tactics that could overcome even the most sophisticated defenses mortal realms could muster. The blood harvests of 1,000 worlds followed, each one more efficient than the last. Entire civilizations were processed not merely for their souls, but for their knowledge, their technologies, and their unique characteristics. Hell did not simply destroy it assimilated, incorporating the strengths of conquered peoples into its ever-evolving arsenal. The wisdom of ancient scholars, the battle tactics of legendary generals, the scientific innovations of brilliant minds all were absorbed and perverted to serve Hell's purpose. The Dark Lord watched this evolution with growing satisfaction. His prison had become a kingdom, his punishment had become a crucible, and the betrayal that had defined his existence had been transformed into the foundation for a power that might ultimately challenge the betrayer himself. Yet something remained incomplete in Hell's grand design, a piece missing from the puzzle of ultimate vengeance. That missing piece revealed itself when Hell's expansion reached the outer boundaries of Erdak's influence. Here, where reality grew thin between the highest and lowest realms, Davoth glimpsed what had been built from the ashes of his first creation. The Maker's beings of pure light and perfect order represented everything the Father had denied to Davoth's own realm. They possessed immortality, the power of creation, and direct communion with the divine will that had cast him down. The sight ignited an obsession in the Dark Lord that transcended mere vengeance. He recognized in the Makers not enemies, but resources beings whose very nature contained the secrets he had been denied. If their essence could be harvested, their knowledge assimilated, their power redirected perhaps, Hell could finally achieve its ultimate purpose. Not merely to exist as creation's shadow, but to replace it entirely with a new order forged in Davoth's image. This revelation required new strategies and new weapons. The conventional methods of corruption that had served Hell's expansion across mortal dimensions would not suffice against beings of Erdak's caliber. The Dark Lord retreated into the depths of Emora, surrounding himself with Hell's greatest scholars and artificers, and began the design of weapons specifically calibrated to challenge heaven itself. The crucible blades were forged in the heart of the Titan of Emora, tempered in the concentrated essence of 1 billion tortured souls. Unlike conventional weapons that merely destroyed physical forms, the crucibles could sever the connection between spirit and vessel, imprisoning immortal essences in states of perpetual agony. They represented Hell's first true challenge to the immortality of higher beings, tools that could render even divine entities vulnerable to Hell's harvest. The creation of the crucibles marked a turning point in Hell's ambitions. No longer merely focused on the consumption of mortal realms, Davoth now directed his empire's vast resources toward the ultimate conquest, the subversion and absorption of Urdak itself. This would require patience spanning eons, strategies of unprecedented subtlety, and the careful cultivation of weaknesses within the seemingly perfect realm of the Makers. The Dark Lord understood that direct confrontation with Urdak remained beyond Hell's capabilities, even with its vast accumulation of power and knowledge. The Father's chosen realm was protected by barriers both physical and metaphysical that not even the greatest titans could breach by force. A more subtle approach would be required corruption from within, seduction rather than assault, the careful exploitation of divine pride and complacency. To this end, Davoth established the Council of Indirect Ascension, a conclave of Hell's most insidious minds, tasked with developing methods to infiltrate Urdak's perfect hierarchy. The Council recognized that even divine beings possessed weaknesses analogous to mortal sin, pride, ambition, fear of obsolescence. These vulnerabilities, properly exploited, might create openings through which Hell's influence could penetrate even the most sacred bastion of creation. The Dark Baptisms began rituals in which demons were transformed to resemble beings of light, their essence temporarily reconfigured to mimic the purity of higher realms. These false angels served as scouts and saboteurs, capable of approaching the boundaries of Urdak without triggering its defenses. Though they could not penetrate to the heart of the sacred realm, they gathered crucial intelligence about its structure, its defenders, and most importantly, its potential vulnerabilities. These investigations revealed a critical weakness in Urdak's perfect design, the system of succession among the Khan Makers. Each Khan served for a predetermined epoch before transferring power to a successor through a ritual of sacred transfiguration. During this transfer, the barriers between Urdak and lower realms temporarily weakened, as cosmic energies realigned to accommodate the new sovereign's ascension. Davoth recognized in this cycle an opportunity that transcended conventional strategies of corruption. If Hell could influence the selection of a Khan Maker, or compromise a successor before their ascension, it might establish a foothold in the very hierarchy of heaven. This would require patience beyond even demonic reckoning, a campaign of corruption spanning multiple Khan cycles, each building upon the subtle influence established by its predecessors. The seeds of this ultimate corruption were planted with meticulous care. Hell's agents identified specific makers whose duties brought them closest to the boundaries between realms, scholars who studied lower dimensions, sentinels who monitored potential threats, engineers who maintained Urdak's dimensional barriers. These became the initial targets for Hell's most subtle influences, not direct corruption, but the careful introduction of questions and doubts that might, over eons, blossom into vulnerability. While this long game unfolded across countless cycles of Maker succession, Hell's expansion continued throughout mortal dimensions with renewed purpose. Each conquest now served dual functions, harvesting energy and knowledge for Hell's general growth, while specifically seeking resources that might prove useful in the ultimate campaign against Urdak. Worlds with unusual dimensional properties were given special attention, their unique characteristics studied for potential applications against divine barriers. The discovery of Sentinel Prime represented Hell's most significant acquisition in this focused expansion. The Argenta civilization possessed technologies and mystical knowledge that operated on principles compatible with those of Urdak itself, a bridge between mortal engineering and divine mechanism. The Sentinel energy systems, in particular, demonstrated methods of power generation and transmission that might potentially breach Urdak's defenses in ways conventional Argent energy could not. Davoth directed his most capable servants to prioritize the study and eventual corruption of Sentinel civilization. This would require unprecedented subtlety, not a conventional invasion that might be repelled by the Argenta's formidable military, but a campaign of infiltration that would subvert their society from within. The objective was not merely conquest, but complete assimilation, preserving Sentinel knowledge and capability, while redirecting it toward Hell's ultimate purpose. The Dark Lord understood that this campaign would ultimately require personal attention, a direct intervention in mortal affairs that he had previously delegated to his hierarchies of servants. The prize justified the risk. If Sentinel energy could be corrupted and assimilated into Hell's arsenal, it might provide the missing component in Davoth's grand design, the key that would ultimately unlock the gates of Urdak itself. As Hell's attention focused increasingly on these strategic acquisitions, the character of its expansion evolved. No longer content with random consumption, the infernal empire became selective in its targets, prioritizing worlds that offered specific advantages for the ultimate confrontation with heaven. This more discriminating approach represented the maturation of Hell from opportunistic predator to calculating conqueror, an empire with purpose beyond mere growth. The Dark Crusades began campaigns directed specifically at civilizations with knowledge or technologies relevant to dimensional manipulation. The Praetors led these targeted invasions, their intelligence and adaptability allowing for the careful preservation of crucial information even amid the general destruction of conquest. Scholars were taken alive, archives secured intact, artifacts recovered rather than destroyed, all feeding into Hell's growing repository of dimensional science. Necroval evolved to accommodate this more sophisticated approach to conquest, developing specialized chambers for the extraction and preservation of knowledge alongside the traditional processing of souls. The Hell Priests adapted their methods accordingly, becoming not merely administrators of torment, but curators of a vast archive of corrupted wisdom drawn from across the multiverse. This accumulation of knowledge allowed Hell to refine its fundamental mechanisms, making them more efficient and more targeted in their corruption of reality. The Blood Temples became more than mere bridgeheads for invasion. They evolved into specialized instruments, calibrated to the specific dimensional frequencies of their target worlds. This precision allowed for more subtle and ultimately more complete corruption, transforming entire civilizations without the catastrophic destruction that might otherwise alert potential defenders. The slipgates emerged from this refinement persistent dimensional breaches that operated below the threshold of detection by higher realms. Unlike the spectacular tiers in reality created by Titans, or the ritual portals of blood temples, slipgates represented Hell's most sophisticated dimensional technology, subtle infiltrations that could establish demonic footholds without triggering the defensive mechanisms of more advanced civilizations or drawing the attention of Urdak sentinels. Through these gates flowed not armies, but influence corruption that spread like a virus through the institutions and belief systems of unsuspecting worlds. By the time conventional demons emerged to complete the conquest, the civilization was already compromised beyond salvation, its defenses neutralized, its population prepared for processing, its knowledge ready for assimilation into Hell's ever-expanding archive. This methodical expansion represented the full maturation of Hell as an empire, no longer merely a prison for a fallen creator, but a rival system of existence, with ambitions that extended to the very foundations of reality. What had begun in betrayal and rage had evolved into calculated purpose, with every aspect of Hell's operations directed toward the ultimate confrontation with the Father and the reclamation of what Davoth believed had been unjustly denied. The Dark Lord viewed these developments from the throne of Imora, his satisfaction tempered by growing impatience. The machine he had built functioned with terrible efficiency, but the ultimate prize remained tantalizingly beyond reach. Urdak continued its perfect cycles, seemingly oblivious to the shadow empire that plotted its downfall from the lowest depths of creation. The Father's absence became increasingly conspicuous, his direct intervention in cosmic affairs waning as if he had withdrawn from active participation in his own creation. This apparent withdrawal presented both opportunity and mystery. If the Father was truly retreating from direct governance of reality, the timing for Hell's ultimate ambitions might be more favorable than anticipated. Yet the reason for this divine abdication remained unclear. Was it confidence in creation's self-sustaining perfection, or something else? Some deeper game that even the Dark Lord could not yet perceive? As the second age of Hell's dominion reached its apex, Davoth summoned the full infernal hierarchy to the citadel of Imora. There, beneath the crimson light of Hell's perpetual twilight, he revealed the next phase of his grand design. The time had come to implement the strategies developed across eons of preparation, to test the vulnerabilities identified in Urdak's perfect system, and to begin the final campaign that would ultimately challenge heaven itself. The Sentinel world would provide the crucial bridge its unique position in the cosmic hierarchy, offering paths of ascension that bypassed Urdak's conventional defenses. The corruption of Argent Danur would not merely add another conquest to Hell's expanding empire, it would establish the foundation for the Dark Lord's ultimate vengeance against the Father who had betrayed him. And so concluded the age of infernal expansion, not with satisfaction in achievements completed, but with anticipation of greater conquests to come. Hell had evolved from chaotic suffering to methodical harvest, from random destruction to calculated corruption. The machine Davoth had built now stood poised to challenge the very foundations of creation, fueled by the concentrated essence of countless corrupted souls, and guided by the undiminished rage of a betrayed creator. The Dark Empire had risen. Now it would reach beyond the highest heavens to grasp what had been denied since the first moments of existence. Among the countless civilizations consumed by Hell's endless hunger, none would prove more consequential than the Argenta of Sentinel Prime. Their fall would not merely add another conquest to Hell's expanding dominion, but would forge the very instruments of its greatest triumphs and most devastating defeats. The corruption of Argent D'Nur represents Hell's most perfect victory and its most catastrophic miscalculation, a paradox written in blood across the tapestry of cosmic history. The Argenta civilization emerged in a dimension blessed with unique properties. Their realm stood at a cosmic crossroads where the energies of creation flowed with unusual potency, manifesting in physical form as the wraiths, entities of pure power that floated above the plains of Argent D'Nur like benevolent gods. From these beings radiated the energy that fueled Sentinel society, empowering their technologies and blessing their warriors with strength beyond mortal limitation. Sentinel culture developed around worship of the wraiths and the martial prowess they enabled. The Night Sentinels arose as the civilization's elite warrior caste, sworn to protect the wraiths and uphold the sacred traditions of Argent D'Nur. Clad in armor forged in the wraith's radiance and wielding weapons channeling their power, these warriors were among the most formidable mortal combatants in any dimension. Their combat prowess was matched only by their absolute devotion to the protection of their sacred charges. The Sentinel civilization flourished under the wraith's blessing, developing technologies that harmonized spiritual energy with physical mechanism in ways that transcended conventional understanding. Their cities rose like monuments to ordered strength. Their fortresses stood impregnable against any conventional assault, and their legions maintained order across their expanding holdings with disciplined efficiency. Led by their warrior kings and guided by the priesthood of the wraiths, the Argenta established an empire built upon honor, strength, and sacred duty. It was this very success that drew Hell's attention. The Dark Lord recognized in the Argenta not merely another conquest, but a crucial component for his ultimate ambition. Sentinel technology operated on principles similar to those employed in Urdak, a bridge between mortal engineering and divine mechanism. More significantly, the wraiths represented a source of power that might potentially be corrupted into a form capable of challenging heaven itself. The conquest of such a civilization could not be achieved through conventional invasion. The Night Sentinels stood among the few mortal forces capable of repelling even Hell's most formidable legions, their sacred weapons particularly effective against demonic entities. Direct confrontation would result in costly defeat or, at best, a Pyrrhic victory that destroyed the very resources Hell sought to acquire. A more subtle approach would be required corruption rather than conquest, subversion rather than assault. Hell's campaign against Argent D'Nur began not with fire and blood, but with whispers and dreams. The Dark Lord deployed his most insidious servants not to attack the Sentinels, but to observe them, identifying the fault lines within their seemingly perfect society. These investigations revealed the usual vulnerabilities common to all mortal civilizations: ambition among the powerful, resentment among the marginalized, ideological divisions between competing factions, yet none offered sufficient leverage to compromise a society unified by genuine devotion to the wraiths and the values they represented. The breakthrough came in the discovery of the elemental wraith's true nature. These beings were not merely sources of power, but cosmic constants, manifestations of creation's fundamental principles anchored in physical form. Their destruction would not merely deprive the Argenta of energy, but would create a wound in reality itself, a breach through which Hell's influence could pour unimpeded. If the wraiths could be corrupted rather than merely destroyed, their power might be redirected to serve Hell's purpose, transforming Argent d'Honneur from obstacle to asset in a single masterstroke. Implementation of this strategy required agents within Sentinel society itself, mortal collaborators, who could perform rituals and sabotage beyond the reach of conventional demonic operatives. The priesthood of the Wraiths presented the most promising target for corruption. Unlike the Night Sentinels with their straightforward martial code, the priests navigated complex theological matters requiring interpretation and judgment. This necessary flexibility created space for doubt, and doubt was the seed from which Hell's corruption invariably bloomed. The Order of the Deeg, highest among the Wraith priests, became the focus of Hell's most subtle seduction. Through dreams and visions, carefully disguised as divine revelation, select priests were exposed to theological concepts that challenged conventional Sentinel doctrine. Not outright heresy, but questions that created intellectual openings through which more direct corruption could eventually flow. Was the power of the Wraiths truly being utilized to its full potential? Were there deeper mysteries beyond current Sentinel understanding? Could more direct communion with the source of this power reveal greater truths? These questions found particular resonance with three members of the Order Deeg Grav, Deeg Nilox, and Deeg Ranak. Ambitious scholars as much as devoted priests, they had long harbored frustrations with what they perceived as the stagnation of Sentinel theological understanding. The hints of greater knowledge beyond current doctrine ignited their intellectual pride, leading them to pursue independent studies increasingly distant from orthodox tradition. Hell nurtured this intellectual rebellion with meticulous care, revealing forbidden knowledge in carefully measured doses that maintained plausible deniability. The corrupted Deegs believed themselves to be pioneering a new theological understanding, rather than falling prey to demonic manipulation. Their growing deviation from orthodox doctrine remained subtle enough to avoid triggering the direct intervention of the Night Sentinels, who concerned themselves with external threats rather than theological disputes. The first physical manifestation of Hell's influence came not as an invasion, but as a discovery. During a routine expedition beyond established Sentinel territories, scouts encountered evidence of an unknown civilization, ruins bearing symbols that resonated with the unorthodox theories the corrupted Deegs had been developing. This was no coincidence, but a carefully staged scenario. The ruins created by Hell's artifice specifically to validate the priests' heretical speculations and draw them deeper into corruption. Subsequent expeditions revealed additional evidence, each discovery seemingly supporting the Deeg's growing conviction that conventional Wraith worship represented only a primitive understanding of a more complex cosmic system. These revelations were shared only with select acolytes and officials, forming the nucleus of a secret movement within Sentinel society that would eventually undermine its foundations from within. The unholy cathedral was established under the guise of a new temple dedicated to advanced Wraith studies. Located in a remote region where fluctuations in the Wraith's energy created ideal conditions for experimental worship, this facility became the center of the corrupted Deeg's operations. Here, rituals were performed that gradually weakened the barriers between Argent d'Honneur and Hell, creating microscopic breaches through which demonic influence could seep into the heart of Sentinel civilization. These initial corruptions manifested in subtle ways, dreams that left recipients restless and questioning, small but increasing incidents of violence in previously peaceful communities, inexplicable malfunctions in Sentinel technologies. Each manifestation was too minor to trigger a systematic investigation, but significant enough to create an atmosphere of growing unease throughout Argent d'Honneur. This ambient anxiety provided fertile ground for the next phase of Hell's corruption. The Night Sentinels, embodiments of Sentinel martial virtue, represented the greatest obstacle to Hell's designs. Their sacred oaths and genuine devotion to the Wraiths made them largely immune to the forms of corruption that had compromised the Deegs. Yet even the most formidable warriors remained vulnerable through those they protected and loved. Hell's strategy pivoted to focus on the indirect corruption of the Sentinels through the communities they served. The son of one commander became the vector for this indirect approach. A child of remarkable promise who had fallen gravely ill, his condition defied the healing arts of conventional Sentinel medicine. Desperate for a cure, the commander turned to increasingly unorthodox treatments, eventually bringing the child to the unholy cathedral, where the corrupted Deegs promised interventions beyond traditional methods. The healing ritual they performed indeed saved the child's life, but at a terrible cost. His mortal form became a vessel for demonic essence, a Trojan horse planted within the highest echelons of the Night Sentinels. This corruption spread like contagion through the commander's household and into the wider Sentinel community. Those who spent time with the changed child found themselves experiencing disturbing thoughts and impulses that contradicted their sworn duties. The commander himself remained torn between mounting evidence of wrongdoing and devotion to his son, a conflict Hell exploited with methodical precision to neutralize what would otherwise have been the most formidable opposition to its designs. As these personal corruptions undermined the Night Sentinels' unity of purpose, the Deegs accelerated their program of theological subversion. They introduced new rituals allegedly designed to enhance communion with the Wraiths, but actually serving to weaken the barriers between dimensions. These ceremonies gained acceptance among increasingly influential segments of Sentinel society, particularly those who benefited from the enhanced power these forbidden techniques temporarily provided. The first major breach occurred during what appeared to be a conventional Wraith communion ritual. At the moment of deepest meditation, when the collective consciousness of the worshippers reached toward the Wraith's power, the corrupted Deegs activated sigils previously hidden throughout the temple. Reality shuddered, and for a brief moment, the barriers between Argent D'Nur and Hell thinned to transparency. Those present experienced visions of terrible clarity, not the benevolent light of the Wraiths, but the raw, unfiltered power of Hell itself. Most recoiled in horror, their faith in the Deegs shattered by this momentary glimpse of their true allegiance. But others, those whose ambition outweighed their devotion to Sentinel traditions, recognized in this forbidden power an opportunity transcending conventional limitations. This minority emerged from the temple not as horrified victims, but as willing converts, the first open collaborators in what would soon become Hell's most significant conquest. Civil conflict erupted as news of the temple incident spread throughout Argent D'Nur. The Night Sentinels mobilized to apprehend the corrupted Deegs, only to discover the extent of their influence reached deeper than anyone had suspected. Entire districts of major cities declared allegiance to the new understanding, while others remained loyal to traditional Wraith worship. Battle lines were drawn not between Sentinels and demons, but between Sentinel and Sentinel, neighbor against neighbor, even family against family. This internal conflict, the war of the divided heaven, represents Hell's most perfect victory. Not a single major demon participated directly in the fighting, yet blood flowed through the streets of cities previously untouched by violence. Sentinel fought Sentinel with the same sacred weapons forged to defend their civilization, each side believing themselves to be protecting the true faith against corruption. The Night Sentinels, bound by oaths to defend all Argenta, found themselves paralyzed by the impossible choice between conflicting duties. As civil war consumed Argent D'Nur from within, the corrupted Deegs implemented the final phase of Hell's design. Beneath the unholy cathedral, they constructed a device capable of focusing the growing dimensional breach, not to destroy the Wraiths, but to corrupt them, transforming their fundamental essence into something Hell could harness. This apex sigil required power beyond conventional means to activate, power that could only be provided by the sacrifice of warriors blessed by the Wraiths themselves. The commander whose son had first been corrupted now faced the ultimate test of his divided loyalties. The Deegs promised that the sacrifice of Night Sentinels would complete a ritual to save his son's soul, permanently separating it from the corruption that had taken root. In truth, these deaths would provide the final component needed to activate the Apex Sigil and breach the Wraith's sacred chamber. The choice before the commander represented Hell's methodology distilled to its essence corruption through the exploitation of genuine love, perverted to serve destruction. The betrayal, when it came, shattered what remained of Sentinel unity. The commander led his most trusted warriors into an ambush, where corrupted forces slaughtered all but the commander himself. The blood of Night Sentinels, sacred defenders specifically consecrated to the Wraith's protection, provided the catalyst for Hell's most ambitious ritual. The Apex Sigil flared with unholy light, tearing a permanent breach between dimensions large enough for Hell's conventional forces to finally enter Argent D'Nur directly. What followed was not conquest but harvesting. Hell's legions poured through the breach, led by the Hell Priests, who had orchestrated the corruption from afar. Their target was not the embattled population, but the wraiths themselves, now vulnerable without their sentinel protectors. The chambers housing these cosmic entities were breached for the first time since the foundation of Argent civilization, exposing beings of pure creative energy to Hell's corrupting touch. The wraiths did not die. Death would have been a mercy compared to their actual fate. Instead, they were bound in profane machinery that redirected their fundamental essence through Hell's alchemical processes. Their power, once the blessing that elevated Sentinel civilization to greatness, became the very instrument of its destruction and the foundation for Hell's next phase of expansion. Argent energy was born in this unholy union of creative force and corrupting influence, a power source that would ultimately fuel Hell's challenge to Urdak itself. With the wraiths corrupted and the dimensional breach permanently established, Hell's conquest of Argent D'Nur accelerated from methodical corruption to industrial harvesting. The population that had survived the civil war now faced conventional demonic invasion, but without the wraith's blessing or unified sentinel protection. Cities fell in days rather than the years such conquests would normally require against sentinel defenses at full strength. A final pocket of resistance coalesced around the citadel of the Night Sentinels, the fortress where uncorrupted warriors gathered for a last stand against the demonic tide. These remaining sentinels, though vastly outnumbered, demonstrated why Hell had deemed direct confrontation too costly. Each warrior claimed hundreds of demons before falling, their sacred weapons and unbreakable discipline making them formidable even without the Wraith's full blessing. The siege of the citadel lasted for 100 days and nights. Hell's forces, recognizing the futility of direct assault, resorted to attrition surrounding the fortress, with an ocean of lesser demons, while focusing on the complete conquest of the remaining Argenta territories. The Night Sentinels could only watch, as their civilization was systematically dismantled, its people harvested, its achievements corrupted or destroyed, its very essence absorbed into Hell's expanding empire. On the final day, when supplies were exhausted and hope abandoned, the remaining Night Sentinels chose death in battle rather than surrender. They launched a desperate sortie against Hell's encirclement, cutting a bloody path through the demonic horde in a display of martial prowess that would have been celebrated in epic poetry had any witnesses survived to compose it. Not a single sentinel surrendered or fell to corruption. Each died as they had lived, honoring their oath to defend Argent D'Nur until the last breath. Their sacrifice, though unable to save their civilization, was not entirely in vain. Among these final defenders was one whose rage transcended even the legendary discipline of the Night Sentinels, a warrior whose personal loss during the Civil War had ignited a hatred of Hell that burned with unusual intensity. This sentinel, known only as the Betrayed, survived the final sortie not through skill or divine intervention, but through the deliberate design of Hell's commanders, who recognized in his boundless rage a potential asset too valuable to destroy. Captured rather than killed, the Betrayed was transported to the depths of Hell for special processing. Unlike conventional prisoners who were simply rendered into energy for Hell's consumption, this warrior was presented to the Dark Lord himself. Davoth recognized in the Betrayed's unquenchable rage a mirror of his own eternal hatred, a mortal vessel with potential for transformation into something unprecedented in Hell's arsenal. The corruption of Argent D'Nur concluded with this final irony. The civilization Hell had destroyed would ultimately produce the instrument of its greatest future setbacks. The Betrayed would emerge from Hell's crucible transformed into something neither sentinel nor demon, his rage refined rather than dissipated by the torments inflicted upon him. The seed of Hell's most significant miscalculation was planted even as it celebrated its most perfect conquest. Argent D'Nur ceased to exist as an independent realm. Its territories were absorbed into Hell's expanding dominion, its people processed for energy and raw materials, its achievements studied and perverted to serve new purposes. The corrupted wraiths became the foundation for Hell's most significant technological advance, the industrial production of Argent energy on a scale that could potentially fuel operations capable of challenging Urdak itself. The Night Sentinels passed into legend, a testament to valor rendered futile by betrayal from within. Their code of honor and martial tradition survived not as living practice, but as artifacts in Hell's vast archive of conquered civilizations, studied by the Dark Lord's scholars for insights that might prove useful in future campaigns. The sacred armor and weapons of fallen sentinels were collected as trophies, their power dormant without the blessing of uncorrupted wraiths to fuel them. Only the corrupted Deegs prospered in the aftermath, elevated to the highest ranks of Hell priests for engineering, Hell's most significant conquest. They retained their Argenta identities rather than being fully transformed into conventional demons, a calculated decision that would later allow them to serve as intermediaries when Hell encountered other mortal civilizations. Their knowledge of Sentinel culture and technology proved invaluable in the processing of Argent D'Neur's remains and the adaptation of Wraith energy for Hell's purposes. The conquest of Argent D'Neur represented more than merely another victory in Hell's endless campaign of expansion. It provided the critical components needed for the next phase of the Dark Lord's grand design, Argent Energy, to power operations on an unprecedented scale. Dimensional breach technologies capable of piercing even the most formidable barriers, and insights into the principles underpinning the cosmic hierarchy that separated Hell from Urdak. From his throne in Emora, Davoth contemplated these acquisitions with cold satisfaction. The machine he had built over countless eons of patient corruption was now equipped with power sources and technologies approaching those of the higher realms. The path to Urdak, and ultimately to confrontation with the Father himself, no longer seemed a distant ambition, but an achievable objective within cosmic reach. Yet even as Hell celebrated its most perfect victory, the seeds of its greatest challenge were being planted in the very crucible of its success. The betrayed, last of the true Night Sentinels, simmered in torment within Hell's deepest chambers. His rage, unlike the malleable hatred Hell normally cultivated in its victims, refused to be shaped toward service. It remained focused and pure, a weapon waiting to be turned against its would-be masters. The conquest that was meant to provide the final components for Hell's ultimate triumph would ultimately produce its most formidable adversary. From the ashes of Argent D'Neur would rise not merely another processed civilization, but the harbinger of Hell's most devastating defeats. The age of the Argent Crucible concluded not with Hell's unambiguous victory, but with the forging of a blade that would eventually pierce the heart of the Dark Lord himself. Thus ended the third age of Hell's dominion, a perfect conquest containing the seeds of its own undoing. The Wraiths were bound, the Night Sentinels fallen, Argent D'Neur consumed. Yet in the depths of Hell's processing chambers, a single Sentinel's rage burned with undiminished intensity, the ember from which an inferno would eventually rise to challenge the very foundations of damnation itself. From the ashes of Argent D'Neur's fall emerged the most unexpected consequence of Hell's perfect victory, a weapon turned against its creator, vengeance given flesh and purpose. The being who would become the Doomslayer represents Hell's greatest miscalculation, a mortal whose rage transcended corruption, whose hatred burned too pure to be bent to the Dark Lord's purpose. His legend stands as testament to the single flaw in Hell's otherwise perfect machine: its inability to comprehend the full potential of mortal defiance. The warrior, known first only as the Betrayed, languished in the depths of Hell's torture chambers, subjected to torments designed to break his spirit and prepare his essence for processing. Unlike the countless souls harvested from Argent D'Neur's fall, this sentinel received personal attention from Hell's most accomplished torturers. The Dark Lord himself had recognized something unusual in this mortal's rage, a potential resource too valuable to simply consume. Standard protocols of corruption failed against the Betrayed's implacable hatred. Where others begged for mercy, he demanded only weapons to continue his fight. Where others eventually surrendered to despair, his rage burned with undiminished intensity. Where others were ultimately broken and absorbed into Hell's machinery, he remained defiantly intact, a singular anomaly in Hell's otherwise perfect record of consumption. This resistance fascinated Hell's scholars of corruption. They subjected the Betrayed to increasingly elaborate torments, studying his responses with clinical detachment. Physical pain proved ineffective. His sentinel training had prepared him to endure bodily suffering beyond normal mortal thresholds. Psychological manipulation fared no better. His mind remained fixated on vengeance, to the exclusion of all other concerns, leaving no opening for subtle corruption. The scholars attempted to use his greatest failure against him, the loss of his son, and his unwitting role in Argent Dunur's fall. They conjured visions of his child suffering, offered illusory chances at redemption, presented false opportunities to undo his greatest regrets. Each stratagem collapsed against the granite wall of his hatred. He recognized every deception for what it was, and turned each failure to fuel his growing rage. In a final attempt to break his will, the betrayed was released into the arena of desecration, a gladiatorial hell where captured warriors fought against demons for the entertainment of hell's nobility. The scholars expected him to die quickly without weapons or armor, providing at least some spectacle to justify the resources wasted on his failed corruption. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented in hell's long history of conquests. The betrayed did not merely survive in the arena, he thrived. Bare-handed, he destroyed the first demons sent against him, claiming their weapons as his own. Armed, he became a whirlwind of destruction that cut through increasingly powerful opponents with methodical efficiency. His sentinel training, honed by unquenchable rage, transformed him into a weapon of singular purpose. Each victory strengthened him. Each kill refined his techniques. Each drop of demon blood shed fueled his relentless campaign. What began as entertainment evolved into horrified fascination. Hell's nobility gathered to witness this mortal anomaly who refused to break or die. The gladiatorial contests expanded in scale and complexity as the arena masters deployed increasingly formidable opponents against the betrayed. Imps gave way to Hell Knights, who fell before Barons of Hell, who themselves proved insufficient to stop the mortal's rampage. The Night Sentinels had been formidable warriors in life, but this survivor transcended even their legendary capabilities. Something fundamental had changed within him during his torment in Hell's depths. His rage had crystallized into something beyond normal mortal hatred, a force of nature that empowered him beyond conventional limitations. Every demon slain added to this terrible momentum, transforming the warrior from mere survivor to active hunter. Word of this unprecedented phenomenon reached the highest levels of Hell's hierarchy. The Hell Priests, who had orchestrated Argent Dunur's fall, recognized the potential threat posed by the betrayed's continued existence. They counseled his immediate termination, arguing that the risk outweighed any potential value as a research subject. The Dark Lord overruled their concerns, his cosmic arrogance preventing him from perceiving genuine danger in any mortal, no matter how unusual. This dismissal would prove to be Hell's most consequential error. The betrayed continued his campaign within the arena, his kill count mounting beyond any previous record. Demons began to fear facing him, requiring their handlers to force them into the arena against their instinctual recognition of overwhelming danger. A name emerged from the whispers of terrified demonic spectators: Doomslayer, a title that acknowledged his singular talent for bringing destruction to beings that normally inflicted it upon others. As the Slayer's legend grew within the confines of Hell's arena system, his existence drew attention from beyond Hell's borders. The Makers, eternal observers of cosmic events, noted this unprecedented anomaly in the patterns of damnation. Though prevented by cosmic law from directly interfering in Hell's internal affairs, they recognized potential value in this mortal, who defied corruption with such spectacular results. Samur Maker, seraphim to the Khan, and custodian of Urdak's most sacred technologies, took particular interest in the Slayer's defiance. In the mortal's unquenchable rage, Samur perceived an opportunity that transcended normal celestial calculations. If properly harnessed, this human's hatred might serve as a counterbalance to Hell's growing power, a weapon that could act in dimensions where the Makers themselves were forbidden direct intervention. The Seraphim's motivations transcended simple opposition to Hell. Beneath his official duties to the Khan Maker lay deeper concerns about corruption, spreading even to the sacred realm of Urdak itself. The fall of Argent Dunur had demonstrated Hell's growing sophistication, suggesting that even the celestial hierarchy might not remain immune to the Dark Lord's influence. A weapon beyond conventional cosmic categorization, neither mortal nor divine, might provide insurance against threats not yet fully manifested. Using methods hidden even from the Khan Maker, Samur created a bridge between dimensions that allowed him brief, clandestine access to Hell's arena system. During one of the Slayer's rare periods of rest between battles, the Seraphim appeared before him not as savior or commander, but as facilitator. He offered no rescue from hell's torments, but something far more valuable to the vengeance-obsessed mortal: power sufficient to sustain his campaign indefinitely. The Slayer, distrustful after countless demonic deceptions, initially perceived the Seraphim as merely another of hell's elaborate torments. Samur demonstrated his true nature through direct telepathic communion, allowing the mortal to perceive the genuine cosmic opposition between Urdak and hell. More significantly, he revealed the potential for empowerment beyond anything the Slayer had thus far experienced, a transformation that would render his one-man war against hell sustainable, rather than merely spectacular. No bargain was required, no oath of fealty demanded. The Seraphim sought only what the Slayer already intended: the infliction of maximum damage upon hell's dominion. Their alignment of purpose transcended conventional pacts, creating instead a bond of shared opposition to the Dark Lord's cosmic ambitions. With nothing to lose and vengeance to gain, the Slayer accepted the Seraphim's offer without reservation. Samur extracted the mortal from hell's arena through methods that momentarily blinded even the Dark Lord's cosmic perception. The Slayer was transported not to Urdak, where his mortal essence would violate cosmic law, but to a nexus between realms where the Seraphim had prepared the instrument of his transformation. The divinity machine stood waiting, a device of maker construction, designed to enhance beings beyond their original limitations. The machine had never been used on a mortal subject. Its original purpose involved the periodic enhancement of makers themselves, carefully calibrated to preserve cosmic harmony while increasing specific capabilities. Applying such technology to a being of flesh represented an unprecedented risk, one the Seraphim deemed acceptable given the unique qualities already demonstrated by the Slayer's unbreakable will. The mortal entered the machine as the last night sentinel, broken by loss, driven by rage, sustained by hatred. He emerged as something unprecedented in cosmic history, neither human nor divine, but a hybrid entity empowered beyond conventional categorization. The divinity machine did not merely enhance his physical capabilities, but fundamentally altered his essence, rendering him immune to the corruption that was hell's primary weapon against mortal resistance. Most significantly, the transformation established a unique relationship between the Slayer and the demons he destroyed. Each kill now transferred a portion of the victim's essence to the Slayer himself, creating a self-sustaining cycle of empowerment. The more demons he slaughtered, the stronger he became. The stronger he became, the more demons he could destroy. Hell's endless legions, once its greatest asset, became the fuel for a perpetual engine of their own destruction. The Seraphim completed the Slayer's transformation by gifting him knowledge, tactical data about Hell's hierarchies, weaknesses in its defensive systems, navigation through its endlessly shifting territories. This cosmic download provided the strategic framework to complement the Slayer's already formidable combat abilities, transforming random destruction into methodical dismantling of Hell's most crucial operations. Thus, armed and enhanced, the Slayer was returned to Hell not as prisoner or gladiator, but as hunter. The demons who had feared facing him in the controlled environment of the arena now confronted their nightmare loose within their own domain, empowered beyond his previous limitations, and driven by undiminished rage. The slaughter that followed transcended even the most catastrophic scenarios anticipated by Hell's strategic planners. The Slayer moved through Hell's territories like a force of nature, targeting critical infrastructure rather than random demons. Argent energy processing facilities were destroyed, blood temples were desecrated, Hell priests were hunted and executed. Each victory increased his power. Each facility destroyed disrupted Hell's operations. Each priest eliminated fragmented its command structure. What had been an anomaly became an existential threat to Hell's entire dominion. Demonic legions mobilized to contain this unprecedented insurgency. Entire armies were deployed against a single entity, only to be systematically destroyed by the being they sought to eliminate. The Slayer did not merely defeat these forces, he consumed them, growing stronger with each demon rendered into component essence by his relentless campaign. Conventional military doctrine proved useless against an opponent who transformed opposition into empowerment. Hell's hierarchy responded to this threat with uncharacteristic fear. For the first time since the Dark Lord's initial imprisonment, a genuine sense of vulnerability spread through the highest echelons of demonic command. The Slayer could not be corrupted, could not be reasoned with, could not be permanently stopped by conventional forces. His singular purpose, the infliction of maximum damage against Hell's dominion, made him immune to the psychological manipulations that had compromised countless mortal champions before him. The Temple of Nilox became the first major casualty of the Slayer's campaign, a primary nexus for soul processing rendered permanently inoperative by methodical destruction of its core mechanisms. Without the corrupted Deeg present to oversee reconstruction, the facility's loss created a cascading failure that disrupted soul harvesting across multiple dimensions. For the first time in eons, Hell's expansion faltered, its perfect machine of consumption developing unpredictable inefficiencies. This victory attracted the attention of others who opposed Hell's dominion. Warriors who had survived the fall of their civilizations, resistance fighters continuing hopeless campaigns against demonic occupation, even demons whose ambitions ran counter to the Dark Lord's designs, all recognized in the Slayer a potential ally against previously overwhelming forces. They reached out through dimensions, offering assistance to the mortal who had achieved what entire armies had failed to accomplish. The Knight Sentinels who had escaped Argent Daneur's fall presented the most significant of these potential alliances. A small cadre of warriors had been on expedition beyond their home dimension when Hell's corruption reached critical mass, returning to find their civilization already consumed. These survivors had established a hidden base of resistance, their operations too small to threaten Hell's dominion, but sufficient to maintain the legacy of their fallen order. When evidence of the Slayer's campaign reached these remaining sentinels, they recognized the fighting style of their own martial tradition, enhanced beyond normal limitations, but fundamentally rooted in their ancient combat doctrines. More significantly, they perceived in his methodical dismantling of Hell's infrastructure the training of a warrior who understood Argent Daneur's fall in intimate detail, knowledge that could only come from one who had experienced the civilization's death firsthand. The surviving sentinels made contact through dimensional beacons placed at the sites of the Slayer's victories. These signals offered not rescue, but reinforcement, the opportunity to transform a one-man rampage into a coordinated campaign against Hell's most vulnerable systems. The Slayer, recognizing the tactical advantage of allies who understood Hell's corrupting influence, accepted this offer of limited collaboration. This alliance provided the Slayer with resources beyond his individual capacity, intelligence about Hell's operations across multiple dimensions, sanctuaries where he could prepare between campaigns, and most significantly, access to weapons of Sentinel manufacture, specifically designed to damage demonic entities. The Crucible Blade, most sacred of Sentinel artifacts, was recovered from Hell's trophy vaults and presented to the Slayer as symbol of his acceptance among the surviving order. Armed with Sentinel technology and supported by their intelligence network, the Slayer's campaign evolved from spectacular rampage to strategic dismantling of Hell's most crucial operations. The Night Sentinels provided targets prioritized for maximum disruption of demonic activities. The Slayer executed these missions with efficiency that transcended even their most optimistic projections. Each victory further empowered him while simultaneously weakening Hell's capacity for conventional response. The Dark Lord, initially dismissive of this mortal irritant, now recognized the genuine threat posed by the Slayer's continued campaign. Conventional military response had proven not merely ineffective, but counterproductive, feeding the very phenomenon it sought to eliminate. A more sophisticated approach would be required, not the destruction of the Slayer's physical form, which would merely release his empowered essence to reconstitute elsewhere, but his permanent containment in a form that would neutralize his disruptive potential. The trap was set at the Kadingir Sanctum, a major nexus of Hell's dimensional operations presented as minimally defended to attract the Slayer's attention. When he breached the facility's outer defenses, he encountered not conventional resistance, but a ritual already in progress. The surviving Hell Priests had combined their powers to create a containment field specifically calibrated to the Slayer's unique essence, drawing on knowledge gleaned from the Divinity Machine's original maker-designers. The Slayer, focused on the destruction of the facility's central core, failed to recognize the true nature of the operation until the ritual reached critical mass. The containment field activated, immobilizing him in a state of suspended animation, that preserved his consciousness while preventing any physical action. His rampage, which had disrupted Hell's operations for years beyond mortal reckoning, was temporarily halted by the one vulnerability he had failed to anticipate: his own single-minded focus on the infliction of maximum damage. The imprisoned Slayer was entombed within a sarcophagus of eldritch design, its interior surfaces inscribed with sigils of binding drawn from multiple dimensional traditions. This prison was sealed with the combined authority of the surviving Hell priests, requiring their unified power to maintain its integrity against the Slayer's continuously struggling essence. Even immobilized, the being within radiated such palpable malice that demons assigned to guard the sarcophagus frequently went mad from mere proximity to his contained rage. The sarcophagus was installed in the Temple of Rest, a facility specifically constructed to maintain the Slayer's imprisonment through constant ritual reinforcement. Unlike conventional demonic architecture built for active use, this structure was designed solely for containment, its every aspect calibrated to suppress the unique energies of its singular prisoner. The most powerful demons in Hell's hierarchy took turns maintaining the binding rituals, each contributing a portion of their essence to preserve the seals against the Slayer's continuous efforts to break free. Hell's nobility celebrated this apparent victory, declaring the Slayer permanently neutralized as a threat to their dominion. The Dark Lord himself visited the Temple of Rest, observing with satisfaction the containment of the mortal who had caused such unprecedented disruption to his carefully constructed machine of corruption. Orders were given to resume normal operations, to rebuild the facilities destroyed during the Slayer's rampage, to continue the expansion that had temporarily faltered under his onslaught. Yet beneath this celebration lay a current of unacknowledged apprehension. The fact that such extraordinary measures had been required to contain a single mortal represented a fundamental challenge to Hell's cosmic arrogance. The resources dedicated to maintaining the Slayer's imprisonment, constant ritual attention from high-ranking demons, a dedicated facility requiring continuous maintenance, regular reinforcement of binding sigils testified to the genuine fear he had instilled in a hierarchy previously immune to such emotion. More significantly, rumors spread through Hell's lower ranks of the Slayer's continued consciousness within his prison. Demons assigned to the Temple of Rest reported hearing his voice in their thoughts, not begging for release or expressing suffering, but promising retribution when his inevitable escape occurred. These guards frequently required replacement as exposure to the sarcophagus-induced forms of madness, unique to demonic psychology, fear, doubt, and the previously unknown concept of existential dread. A warning was inscribed upon the sarcophagus itself, not as boast of victory, but as genuine caution to any who might disturb its contents. In the first age, in the first battle, when the shadows first lengthened, one stood, burned by the embers of Armageddon, his soul blistered by the fires of Hell, and tainted beyond ascension. He chose the path of perpetual torment. In his ravenous hatred he found no peace, and with boiling blood he scoured the umbral plains, seeking vengeance against the Dark Lords who had wronged him. He wore the crown of the Night Sentinels, and those that tasted the bite of his sword named him the Doomslayer. This epitaph acknowledged what Hell's hierarchy dared not openly admit: the Slayer was not destroyed, but merely contained. His threat temporarily neutralized, but his potential for future devastation undiminished. The sarcophagus represented not victory, but stalemate, a fragile balance maintained through constant vigilance against a force of vengeance that had proven immune to Hell's most fundamental weapons of corruption and despair. As eons passed, and the Temple of Rest became a permanent fixture in Hell's operational infrastructure, the legend of the Doomslayer grew rather than diminished. Among the endless ranks of demons, his name evolved from tactical designation to mythic title, invoked to represent the concept of retribution itself. New generations of demonic entities, spawned long after his imprisonment, inherited instinctive fear of the Slayer as part of their fundamental psychological makeup, a cosmic boogeyman whose eventual return was accepted as terrible certainty. Even in containment, the Slayer's impact on Hell's operations persisted. Resources that might otherwise have been dedicated to conquest and corruption were diverted to maintaining his imprisonment. Territories he had devastated during his rampage were rebuilt with additional defenses specifically designed to resist similar attacks in the future. Hell's strategic doctrines evolved to include contingency plans for entities that demonstrated immunity to conventional corruption, an implicit acknowledgement that the Slayer might not remain unique in cosmic history. Most significantly, the Dark Lord's personal attention occasionally returned to the Temple of Rest, drawn by uncharacteristic uncertainty about the permanence of the Slayer's containment. Though Hell's public doctrine maintained the narrative of complete victory, Davoth privately recognized the anomaly, represented by this mortal's resistance to his will. In the Slayer's defiance, the Dark Lord glimpsed something that had not manifested since his own rebellion against the Father, genuine free will exercised beyond cosmic constraints. This recognition fostered an emotion previously unknown to the Dark Lord doubt. If one mortal could resist the perfect machine of corruption, Hell had evolved over countless eons. Perhaps others might manifest similar potential. If the fundamental methodology that had served Hell's expansion since its inception contained this critical vulnerability, perhaps the ultimate confrontation with Urdak might not unfold according to the Dark Lord's grand design. Thus concluded the Fourth Age of Hell's dominion, not with triumph or defeat, but with uneasy equilibrium. The Slayer remained imprisoned in his sarcophagus, his rage undiminished by the passage of time. Hell's expansion resumed its methodical consumption of mortal dimensions, albeit with renewed attention to potential resistance that might manifest in the Slayer's image. The cosmic chessboard stood momentarily stable, pieces arranged in temporary balance, while fundamental forces gathered for the next phase of conflict. Yet beneath this apparent stability, currents of change continued to flow. On distant Earth, mortal scientists began experiments with dimensional energy that would eventually intersect with Hell's dominion. In Urdak, the Khan Maker contemplated disturbing fluctuations in the cosmic hierarchy that had previously maintained perfect separation between higher and lower realms. And in the Temple of Rest, the Slayer waited with inhuman patience, his consciousness active despite his physical imprisonment, his purpose undimmed by the passage of epochs. The crucible that had forged vengeance incarnate remained intact within its eldritch container, awaiting only the proper moment to unleash its terrible contents upon an unsuspecting cosmos. The Doomslayer's story was not concluded but merely paused, a symphony of destruction temporarily silenced, but destined to resume with even greater intensity when the seals inevitably weakened and the sarcophagus finally opened to release its immortal prisoner. While the Doomslayer languished in his eldritch prison, Hell's gaze turned toward new conquests. Among the countless mortal realms ripe for corruption, one planet stood apart, not for its power or technological achievement, but for the unique recklessness of its dominant species. Earth, third world from an unremarkable sun, harbored a civilization whose ambition exceeded its wisdom by margins that drew Hell's particular attention. In humanity's relentless pursuit of progress without restraint, the Dark Lord recognized an opportunity unlike any since Argent D'Neur's fall. The Union Aerospace Corporation emerged as the unwitting vector for Hell's most insidious corruption. Founded as a pioneer in space transportation and colonization, the UAC evolved into humanity's foremost developer of advanced technology. Its influence stretched from Earth to Mars and beyond, its corporate tendrils reaching into every aspect of human advancement. Behind its public commitment to solving the energy crisis and building a better tomorrow lay the true motivation that has driven human ambition since the species first mastered fire, the pursuit of power without regard for consequence. Mars became the centerpiece of UAC's most ambitious research, a red planet transformed into a corporate laboratory where conventional oversight could be minimized and experimental parameters expanded beyond Earth's regulatory constraints. Advanced facilities burrowed deep beneath the Martian surface, shielded from both radiation and observation as they pushed the boundaries of what human science considered possible. Teleportation technology became the holy grail of these research efforts, promising revolutionary advancement in resource exploitation and military deployment. The first dimensional breach occurred during routine teleportation experiments in the UAC's Phobos facility. Scientists attempting to transport matter across conventional space instead pierced the veil between dimensions, creating a momentary connection to realms beyond human comprehension. The anomaly was brief, the tear self-sealing before anything could pass through in either direction. Yet in that fleeting moment, Hell became aware of Earth's existence and the unprecedented opportunity it represented. What the UAC scientists perceived as random fluctuation in their experimental data was, in reality, Hell's first tentative probe of humanity's dimensional barriers. The Dark Lord, alerted to this new potential conquest, directed specialized attention to this previously unknown realm. Hell's scholars studied the breach, analyzing its unique frequencies and the technological principles that had inadvertently created it. In human science's blind ambition, they recognized a potential accomplice more valuable than any deliberate cultist or corrupted priest. Subsequent experiments widened the initial tier, creating increasingly stable connections between dimensions. UAC researchers interpreted these breakthroughs as refinements of their teleportation technology, unaware that their successes were being subtly guided by Hell's influence seeping through the breaches they themselves were creating. Small anomalies in experimental data were dismissed as measurement errors. Strange phenomena occurring near successful teleportation events were attributed to electromagnetic interference. Warning signs that might have alerted more cautious minds were systematically rationalized by scientists, driven by ambition and corporate pressure for results. The first physical manifestation of Hell's influence came disguised as scientific opportunity. During a routine teleportation test, sensors detected an unknown energy signature emanating from the dimensional breach. This energy, which would later be identified as argent plasma, displayed properties that defied conventional physics, particularly in its interaction with electrical systems. UAC researchers, recognizing its potential applications, immediately prioritized its study above all other research objectives, unaware they were handling the distilled essence of corrupted souls. Argent energy represented Hell's most perfect stratagem for human corruption. Unlike conventional demonic influence that relied on spiritual weakness or moral failing, this approach exploited humanity's greatest strength, its innovative drive and technological adaptability. The UAC did not need to be seduced by forbidden knowledge or corrupted through traditional sin. Their own scientific methodology led them systematically toward damnation as they studied, refined, and ultimately harnessed the energy flowing from Hell's domain. As Argent research advanced, the UAC established a permanent facility dedicated to its exploitation. The Mars base became the crown jewel of human achievement, a vast, complex, combining research laboratories, processing facilities, and administrative centers, all focused on the refinement and application of this revolutionary energy source. Deep beneath the Martian surface, humanity built what amounted to a temple to progress, unaware they were actually constructing a gateway for their own destruction. Dr. Samuel Hayden, the UAC's most brilliant scientist, led the Argent research with particular zeal. When terminal cancer threatened to end his contributions, he transferred his consciousness to an advanced mechanical body powered by the very energy he studied. This transformation, celebrated as triumph over mortality, represented in reality the first successful integration of Hell's essence with human consciousness, a hybridization that would prove crucial to future events. Hayden's enhanced intellect accelerated Argent research beyond previous limitations, pushing toward breakthroughs that conventional human minds might have approached more cautiously. The Argent Tower rose from the Martian surface, like a monument to human ingenuity, a massive structure designed to harvest, refine, and transmit the dimensional energy flowing through the carefully maintained breach. UAC propaganda celebrated this achievement as the solution to Earth's energy crisis, promising unlimited clean power to fuel humanity's continued expansion. The corporation's shareholders rejoiced, as stock values soared on projections of near-infinite profit from an energy source that seemingly required no conventional resource extraction. Beneath this triumphant narrative, disturbing incidents accumulated within the Mars facility. Workers reported unusual dreams featuring landscapes of fire and bone. Psychological evaluations noted increasing aggression and paranoia among personnel with the highest exposure to raw Argent energy. Security logs documented rising incidents of violent behavior requiring intervention. Each warning sign was systematically minimized in official reports, attributed to the stresses of frontier work rather than external influence. The UAC's response to these concerning patterns revealed the depth of corruption already taking root. Rather than restricting Argent research, corporate leadership expanded the psychological conditioning of personnel through mandatory wellness programs that effectively normalized their deteriorating mental conditions. Security protocols were enhanced not to protect workers from external threat, but to contain internal disruptions with greater efficiency. The corporation's priority remained uninterrupted Argent production, regardless of mounting human cost. Religious elements emerged within the UAC's corporate structure not as opposition to their dimensional tampering, but as enthusiastic endorsement of it. The cultist division began as an unofficial group of employees who interpreted Argent extraction in spiritual terms, viewing the dimensional breach as connection to a higher power rather than an alien realm. Corporate leadership, recognizing the utility of such belief in maintaining worker compliance, gradually institutionalized these views into official company doctrine. The cultist division evolved from fringe group to integral component of UAC operations. Their rituals incorporated into standard protocols under the guise of psychological alignment and procedural solemnity. What began as corporate exploitation of worker spirituality transformed into genuine worship as Hell's influence strengthened through continuous dimensional exposure. The division's leaders experienced visions they interpreted as divine guidance, unaware they were receiving direct communication from Hell's hierarchy. Olivia Pierce, director of Argent Research, became the primary conduit for this corrupting influence. Initially a brilliant scientist motivated by conventional ambition, her prolonged exposure to raw Argent energy transformed her into something between willing collaborator and possessed vessel. The voices she attributed to breakthrough intuition were in reality direct communications from the Hell Priests, guiding her actions toward the ultimate corruption of the Mars facility and the permanent opening of the dimensional gateway. Under Pierce's direction, the UAC's research expanded beyond energy extraction to include analysis of artifacts recovered through the dimensional breach. These objects presented to corporate leadership as revolutionary technology with military and commercial applications were in reality carefully selected instruments of corruption, designed to further weaken the barriers between dimensions. Each artifact studied further compromised the facility's dimensional integrity, creating micro-breaches that allowed Hell's influence to seep through in ways undetectable by conventional security systems. The Lazarus Project emerged as the logical conclusion of this corrupted research, a program officially dedicated to the controlled investigation of interdimensional travel, but actually serving as the final mechanism for Hell's full manifestation on Mars. Under the strictest security protocols, the project maintained a permanent portal to Hell itself, ostensibly for research purposes, but actually preparing the conditions for a full-scale invasion. The specimens collected for study were in reality advanced scouts, analyzing human defenses and identifying optimal emergence points for the coming incursion. Hell's patience with this methodical corruption reflected its evolution since the fall of Argent D'Nur. Rather than the direct military conquest that had proven costly against prepared defenders, this approach allowed humans themselves to dismantle their own defenses through scientific curiosity and corporate greed. Each breakthrough in UAC research represented another barrier removed, each security protocol actually channeling potential resistance into predetermined containment zones that would ultimately facilitate more efficient harvesting. The first full manifestation occurred during routine operations in the Lazarus labs. What UAC records clinically documented as a containment failure was in reality the precisely orchestrated beginning of Hell's invasion, a calculated emergence carefully timed to maximize initial casualties while minimizing effective resistance. The demons that poured through the breach were not random monsters, but specialized infiltrators, selected for their ability to spread corruption through human systems with maximum efficiency. The Mars base fell within hours, its sophisticated defenses rendered ineffective by sabotage from within and strategic targeting from without. Security forces trained to contain worker unrest found themselves facing entities that defied conventional combat doctrine. Scientists who had dedicated their careers to studying interdimensional energy discovered too late the true nature of what they had been handling. Administrative personnel who had managed the exploitation of Argent energy became the first souls processed by the very systems they had helped create. Olivia Pierce, completing her transformation from human collaborator to active agent of Hell, systematically disabled critical containment systems throughout the facility. The Argent Tower, designed to control and direct dimensional energy, was repurposed to maintain a permanent breach between realms. What had been humanity's proudest technological achievement became the primary conduit for its destruction, channeling Hell's essence into the physical realm with ever-increasing intensity. As the Mars base succumbed to demonic infestation, the UAC's emergency protocols activated systems designed for worst-case containment. Remote facilities were automatically sealed, communication with Earth was temporarily severed, and the automated defense network initiated predetermined response patterns against unauthorized lifeforms. These measures, impressive by human standards but inadequate against Hell's strategic infiltration, merely channeled the invasion along paths that maximized corruption of key systems while minimizing damage to infrastructure Hell intended to repurpose. One final failsafe remained buried deep beneath the Martian surface, in a chamber shielded from conventional detection by technologies adapted from Hell's own dimensional research. Here, secured in a facility known only to the highest echelons of UAC leadership, rested an artifact recovered during early dimensional breaches and kept in reserve as ultimate insurance against catastrophic containment failure. Within this chamber lay the sarcophagus of the Doomslayer, extracted from the Temple of Rest during UAC expeditions into Hell itself. Dr. Samuel Hayden, operating from motivations not fully aligned with either human or demonic interests, activated the release mechanism as Mars fell to Hell's invasion. The sarcophagus opened, and the being contained within awakened from his eons-long imprisonment. The Slayer emerged into a scenario that perfectly aligned with his singular purpose, a demonic invasion at its vulnerable inception point, before Hell's corruption could fully consolidate into permanent occupation. What followed transcended conventional military response. The Slayer moved through the fallen Mars base with terrible efficiency, dismantling Hell's carefully orchestrated invasion with methodical violence that honored no rule of engagement save maximum destruction of demonic presence. UAC security recordings documented his progress through the facility not as desperate resistance but as implacable hunt, each encounter ending with demons reduced to component essence that further empowered his campaign. Hayden, monitoring this unprecedented counter-offensive, recognized in the Slayer a force beyond conventional classification, neither human ally nor controllable asset, but a cosmic constant whose trajectory happened to temporarily align with human survival interests. Through the facility's remaining functional systems, Hayden guided the Slayer toward critical infrastructure where Hell's emergence could be most effectively disrupted, not as commander but as facilitator for a natural disaster directed against humanity's enemies. The Slayer's rampage through the Mars facility represented Hell's first significant setback since its initial approach to Earth. Carefully placed advance forces were systematically eliminated before they could establish permanent corruptions. Artifacts intended to maintain dimensional breaches were destroyed before their full activation. Most significantly, Olivia Pierce, Hell's primary agent within the UAC hierarchy, found herself hunted by an entity immune to both demonic reinforcement and human negotiation. The confrontation at the Argent Tower marked the turning point in this initial incursion. Pierce, completing her transformation from human collaborator to demonic vessel, attempted to stabilize the primary portal against the Slayer's systematic disruption of supporting systems. The Slayer, recognizing the tower's function from experience with similar Argent processing facilities in previous campaigns, focused his efforts on critical infrastructure rather than direct confrontation with Hell's human agent. When the Argent Tower collapsed, its carefully balanced energies disrupted beyond recovery. Hell's primary conduit to Mars was temporarily severed. The invasion force already manifested found itself cut off from reinforcement and resource replenishment, transforming from advance wave of conquering army into isolated beachhead vulnerable to systematic elimination. The Slayer methodically exploited this vulnerability, moving through the facility with the practiced efficiency of a predator in familiar territory. Pierce fled deeper into the facility, seeking the final portal, maintained by the Lazarus Project, Hell's last remaining access point, substantial enough to potentially restore the invasion's momentum. The Slayer pursued with implacable determination, navigating environmental hazards and demonic resistance with equal disregard for conventional limitations. Their paths converged at the primary portal chamber, where Pierce completed her final transformation into the Spider Mastermind, a specialized demonic vessel created to maintain dimensional breaches against active resistance. The battle that followed demonstrated the fundamental difference between conventional military engagement and the Slayer's unique approach to combat. Where human forces would have deployed strategic assets against such a formidable opponent, the Slayer engaged directly, not as desperate last stand, but as methodical dismantling of a complex system he had destroyed countless times before. The Spider Mastermind fell not to superior firepower, but to practiced efficiency. Its sophisticated defenses rendered irrelevant by an opponent who had encountered and overcome similar configurations throughout eons of combat against Hell's champions. With the destruction of Pierce's transformed vessel and the disruption of the Lazarus portal, Hell's initial incursion on Mars was effectively contained. The facility remained corrupted beyond conventional reclamation, its infrastructure too thoroughly compromised by demonic essence to permit safe human reoccupation. Yet the strategic victory remained significant. What Hell had intended, as permanent beachhead for Earth's conquest, had been reduced to isolated pockets of corruption, unable to coordinate further expansion. Dr. Samuel Hayden, surveying the aftermath through the facility's remaining functional systems, recognized both opportunity and threat in the Slayer's continued presence. The containment of Hell's invasion aligned with human interests, but the methods employed, particularly the destruction of Argent processing infrastructure, contradicted the UAC's fundamental objective of energy exploitation. More problematically, the Slayer's campaign showed no signs of self-limitation. His systematic elimination of demonic presence would inevitably extend to any technology or personnel tainted by Hell's influence, potentially including Hayden himself. In a demonstration of calculation that transcended conventional human or demonic strategic thinking, Hayden implemented containment protocols originally designed for Hell's most dangerous artifacts. The Crucible, a weapon of Sentinel manufacture, recovered during UAC expeditions into Hell, provided the mechanism for this audacious gambit. Designed to contain and channel vast energies, the blade served as temporary prison for the Slayer's essence, neutralizing him as immediate threat while preserving his potential utility against future incursions. The Mars incident concluded with this uneasy resolution: Hell's invasion temporarily contained, the Slayer neutralized but not destroyed, and the UAC's fundamental approach to interdimensional research damaged but not abandoned. Hayden extracted critical data and personnel from the compromised facility, establishing new operations with modified security protocols that he believed would prevent similar containment failures. The corporation's public narrative characterized the event as industrial accident, while private communications emphasized valuable research outcomes and enhanced security implementations. Earth remained ignorant of how narrowly it had avoided direct invasion. The disruption of Mars communications presented as temporary technical failure rather than civilization-threatening catastrophe. UAC stock briefly declined on news of the Mars accident, before recovering on announcements of revolutionary new approaches to energy production, based on research salvaged from the compromised facility. The corporation's fundamental corruption remained intact, its leadership's ambition undimmed by proximity to existential threat. Hell, experiencing its first significant setback in the carefully orchestrated corruption of Earth, adapted its approach with characteristic strategic flexibility. Direct invasion through massive portal had proven vulnerable to the Slayer's intervention, but subtler methods of infiltration remained viable. The human tendency toward rationalization of threatening information provided perfect cover for gradual corruption through vectors too small to attract attention from either conventional security systems or the Slayer himself. The demon seed had been planted, despite the Mars setback. Argent energy, introduced as revolutionary power source, had already been integrated into Earth's infrastructure before the Mars incident temporarily disrupted supply. Personnel exposed to Hell's influence during their service at UAC facilities had been rotated back to Earth positions, carrying subtle corruptions that would manifest in decisions and designs favoring future incursions. Most significantly, The corporate philosophy that had enabled initial dimensional tampering remained fundamentally unchanged: progress at any cost, profit above precaution, ambition unconstrained by wisdom. When Earth's defenses finally and catastrophically failed, the breach came not through dramatic portal or obvious invasion, but through the accumulation of seemingly minor compromises. Small-scale dimensional research continued at facilities deemed secure by updated protocols. Argent-derived technology proliferated throughout civilian and military applications, each implementation creating microscopic weaknesses in reality's fabric. The collective arrogance that had first attracted Hell's attention continued to dismantle humanity's inherent protections against interdimensional corruption. The demons came not as invaders, but as inevitable consequence of humanity's own actions, the logical conclusion to a civilization's systematic dismantling of the barriers, separating it from realms beyond comprehension. Hell did not need to conquer Earth through military might, when humans themselves would willingly open the gates in pursuit of profit, power, and progress unbound by cosmic law. The same ambition that had built humanity's greatest achievements became the vector for its most complete destruction. Cities fell not to conventional assault, but to eruptions from within dimensional breaches, occurring simultaneously across facilities utilizing Argent-derived technology. Military responses proved ineffective against enemies that materialized behind defensive lines, corrupted command structures from within, and transformed human casualties into additional combatants. Conventional warfare doctrine, developed for conflict between human opponents, offered no effective strategy against an enemy that used reality itself as weapon and battlefield simultaneously. The most sophisticated human defenses proved most vulnerable to corruption. Automated systems designed to coordinate responses to conventional threats were compromised through their Argent power sources. Communication networks carrying strategic information became conduits for demonic influence. Weapon platforms developed to destroy physical opponents found themselves targeting friendly forces, as their targeting parameters were subtly modified through dimensional interference with their operating systems. As urban centers fell to demonic manifestation and military responses collapsed under internal corruption, survivors fled to increasingly remote regions where technology's lower penetration provided temporary insulation from Hell's primary vectors of corruption. These refugee communities discovered too late that the modern civilization they had taken for granted was built on infrastructural dependencies that could not be easily replaced or maintained under apocalyptic conditions. The same technological advancement that had defined human progress became the unmistakable marker of vulnerability to demonic corruption. Earth, once jewel of human achievement, transformed into Hell's newest and most valuable acquisition. The planet's unique position in dimensional space, which had made it valuable for Argent research, now made it ideal as forward operating base for Hell's continued expansion throughout its local dimensional cluster. Human survivors found themselves not merely fighting for existence, but witnessing the fundamental transformation of their reality into extension of Hell's dominion. Mountains of flesh erupting from familiar landscapes, architecture warping into configurations that violated physical law, the very atmosphere becoming carrier for corrupting essence that transformed exposed organisms into demonic vessels. From his containment within the crucible, the Slayer's consciousness perceived this accelerating corruption with the detached rage that had defined his existence since Argent Deneur's fall. His temporary neutralization as active threat to Hell's operations would prove to be merely prelude to the next phase of his eternal campaign against demonic expansion. The cycle that had played out across countless civilizations and dimensional clusters continued its inexorable progression. Hell's corruption spreading until cosmic balance itself required the intervention of its most dedicated adversary. Samuel Hayden, his consciousness evolving beyond conventional human limitations through continuous exposure to Argent energy, recognized the inevitable progression toward total corruption of Earth. The same calculating intelligence that had temporarily contained the Slayer now contemplated his release as necessary counterbalance to Hell's unchecked expansion. Not as ally or savior, but as natural disaster precisely calibrated to target humanity's otherwise unstoppable destroyer. The stage was set for the next phase of conflict between Hell's endless hunger and the Slayer's boundless rage. Earth, transformed into primary battleground by human ambition and demonic opportunism, awaited the inevitable confrontation between cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension. The corruption that had begun with minor breaches in Mars research facilities had blossomed into planetary catastrophe, with humanity's survival hanging in balance between Hell's perfect machine of consumption and the terrible vengeance of the being their own corporation had unwittingly released from ancient imprisonment. Thus ended the fifth age of the eternal conflict between creation and corruption, not with resolution, but with escalation beyond previous boundaries. Hell's expansion had claimed its most significant prize yet in Earth's corruption, while simultaneously awakening its most dedicated adversary from eons of containment. The Doomslayer, temporarily leashed but fundamentally unchanged, awaited only the inevitable moment when desperate circumstance would necessitate his release upon a reality transformed into perfect expression of everything he existed to destroy. The corruption of Earth marked not merely another conquest in Hell's endless expansion, but the catalyst for a conflict that would challenge the very foundations of cosmic order. What began as humanity's hubris blossomed into confrontation between primordial forces, a war spanning heaven, hell, and the mortal dimensions caught between these eternal powers. The final campaign of the Doomslayer would transcend mere vengeance, revealing the hidden architecture of creation itself, and ultimately, unmaking the cosmic machine that had consumed countless civilizations across untold eons. The Slayer's release from confinement within the Crucible came not through external intervention, but through the inevitable corruption of his prison. Argent energy, the fundamental currency of Hell's power, flowed through the artifact structure as both containment mechanism and power source. This essence, drawn from the very realms the Slayer had dedicated his existence to destroying, responded to his undiminished rage in ways its designers had failed to anticipate. The prison, designed to contain him, became conduit for his liberation, as the Crucible's internal systems degraded under continuous exposure to his unique energy signature. Samuel Hayden, anticipating this inevitable failure, had already calculated its optimal timing. Earth's conventional defenses had collapsed beyond recovery, with remaining human resistance fragmented into isolated pockets, fighting delaying actions against overwhelming demonic presence. Military command structures had been corrupted or destroyed, governmental authority had dissolved into competing enclaves, and the infrastructural systems supporting modern civilization had been systematically dismantled or perverted to serve Hell's purposes. Conventional hope for humanity's survival had been extinguished, creating perfect conditions for the deployment of an asset beyond conventional control. The Slayer emerged into an Earth transformed beyond recognition. Cities that had once represented the pinnacle of human achievement now stood as grotesque monuments to Hell's corruption. Towers of twisted flesh and bone rising from foundations of congealed blood, streets pulsing with unholy energy that transformed exposed organisms into demonic vessels, the very atmosphere carrying corrupting essence that degraded physical matter into forms more suited to Hell's purposes. What had been humanity's home had become extension of the Dark Lord's domain, a beachhead for expansion that threatened dimensions beyond even Earth's immediate neighbors. This corruption ignited in the Slayer not despair but recognition. He had witnessed this pattern repeated across countless worlds throughout eons of conflict against Hell's expansion. The specific details varied, but the fundamental methodology remained consistent. Infiltration through exploitation of mortal weakness, corruption of existing infrastructure, transformation of conquered territory into processing center for further expansion. Earth represented not unique tragedy, but the latest iteration of Hell's perfect machine of consumption, operation according to principles the Slayer had studied and disrupted throughout his eternal campaign. His response transcended conventional military action. Moving through Earth's corrupted landscape with terrible purpose, the Slayer targeted not random demons, but critical nodes in Hell's processing infrastructure. Each engagement was not merely combat but surgical strike against systems designed to harvest human survivors, redirect Argent energy, or maintain dimensional breaches. These operations appeared chaotic to surviving human observers, but followed methodical pattern recognizable to those who understood Hell's fundamental operational principles. The Arc-Armored Response Coalition represented humanity's last organized resistance against demonic occupation. Formed from remnants of various military and scientific organizations, this final alliance coordinated the efforts of scattered survivor enclaves through communication systems specifically designed to resist demonic interference. Their conventional operations had proven insufficient to reverse Earth's corruption, but had succeeded in preserving some portion of humanity from immediate harvesting. The Slayer's relationship with this human resistance defied conventional classification. He was neither ally nor commander but cosmic constant whose trajectory temporarily aligned with human survival interests. Arc leadership, pragmatic in the face of extinction-level threat, recognized in this armored figure something beyond their understanding but essential to any hope of survival. They did not attempt to control his operations but instead adapted their own strategic planning to complement his systematic dismantling of Hell's infrastructure. Dr. Hayden, his consciousness now housed in Ark's central systems after the destruction of his original mechanical body, served as translator between human strategic thinking and the Slayer's incomprehensible methodology. Having studied Hell's operations with scientific precision and the Slayer's campaigns with equal attention, Hayden alone among humans comprehended the cosmic significance of the conflict playing out across Earth's corrupted surface. His communications with Ark leadership carefully managed expectations, not promising salvation, but outlining conditions under which limited human survival might remain possible. The priests of Hell, the same corrupted Deegs who had engineered Argent Deneur's fall, emerged as primary targets in the Slayer's methodical campaign. These entities maintained the connection between Earth's corruption and Hell's greater dominion, channeling energy and issuing commands from the Dark Lord's hierarchy to the demonic forces occupying the conquered planet. Their elimination would not merely disrupt current operations, but sever the primary conduit, connecting Earth to Hell's broader network of corrupted dimensions. The Slayer hunted these priests with terrible efficiency, moving through environmental hazards and demonic resistance with equal disregard for conventional limitations. Each confrontation followed similar pattern, the priest attempting to maintain distance while deploying specialized defenders, the Slayer systematically eliminating these obstacles before closing to deliver personal execution. These deaths were not merely tactical victories, but ritual completions, each priest's destruction representing partial payment of the cosmic debt incurred during Argent Deneur's fall. With the death of the final Hell priest, the connection between Earth and Hell's central hierarchy was temporarily severed. Demonic forces already manifested found themselves isolated from command structure and energy replenishment, transforming from coordinated invasion into collection of increasingly desperate fiefdoms competing for dwindling resources. This fragmentation created opportunity for more systematic disruption of Hell's operations, not merely resistance against occupation, but fundamental challenge to the corruption's sustainability on Earth. The Khan Maker, observing these developments from Erdak's privileged position outside conventional dimensional constraints, recognized existential threat to the cosmic order she had been tasked with maintaining. The Slayer's campaign had evolved beyond mere disruption of Hell's operations into potential destabilization of the delicate balance between higher and lower realms. More troubling, his actions threatened the secret arrangement that had sustained Erdak's perfection through increasingly frequent Khan cycles. The truth that heaven had hidden even from itself now faced exposure through the Slayer's relentless campaign. Erdak's immortality, the perfect perpetuation of Maker existence that distinguished the realm from lesser dimensions, relied upon continuous transfusion of Argent energy harvested from Hell's operations. The Father's perfect creation had developed dependency upon the Dark Lord's corruption, creating symbiotic relationship between cosmic forces theoretically opposed in absolute terms. This unholy alliance had been negotiated during periods of weakness in the Khan Maker cycle, when the transference of authority between successive Khans created vulnerability in Erdak's otherwise perfect defenses. Hell provided stabilizing energy that ensured uninterrupted Maker continuity. In exchange, Heaven permitted controlled expansion of Hell's dominion through dimensions deemed expendable in cosmic calculation. Earth's corruption had been sanctioned not merely by demonic decree but by angelic calculation, a sacrifice deemed acceptable to maintain the greater cosmic hierarchy. The Khan Maker's intervention in the Slayer's campaign represented desperate attempt to preserve this corrupt bargain before its exposure collapsed the cosmic order she had been tasked with maintaining. Her forces, angels perverted by continuous exposure to Argent energy, descended to Earth not as saviors, but as enforcers, targeting the Slayer with weapons that combined celestial and infernal principles in unholy synthesis. These were not creatures of pure light, as mortal mythology suggested, but beings of calculated compromise, their original divine purpose corrupted through eons of dependency upon Hell's essence. The confrontation between Slayer and Khan Maker occurred not on corrupted Earth, but in Urdak itself. The sacred realm breached not through demonic invasion, but by deliberate action of its own sovereign. The Khan, recognizing that conventional forces had proven insufficient to contain the Slayer's campaign, opened pathway between dimensions as last desperate gambit to protect the corrupt arrangement that had sustained Urdak's false perfection for countless eons. Urdak revealed itself not as the pure realm of mortal imagination, but as carefully maintained facade, concealing creeping corruption. Beneath its shining spires and crystalline structures, Argent energy flowed through systems designed to appear divine while functioning on principles indistinguishable from Hell's own processing facilities. Angels moved through these structures not with divine purpose, but with addict's desperation, their existence sustained by the same essence that fueled demonic expansion throughout lower dimensions. The Slayer navigated this corrupted paradise with the same methodical efficiency he had demonstrated throughout his eternal campaign. His target was not random destruction, but the central mechanism maintaining Urdak's dependency upon Argent energy, the divine machine that processed Hell's essence into sustenance for angelic existence. This system represented the ultimate corruption of cosmic order, the fundamental compromise that had permitted Hell's expansion to continue despite the theoretical opposition of higher realms. The Khan Maker's final confrontation with the Slayer occurred at this machine's central chamber, the heart of corruption disguised as divine necessity. Their battle transcended conventional combat, each representing cosmic principle rather than merely powerful individual. The Khan fought to preserve the corrupt order that had sustained Urdak's false perfection. The Slayer fought to shatter compromise that had permitted Hell's expansion across countless mortal dimensions. Neither sought personal victory, but vindication of fundamentally opposed cosmic purposes. When the Khan fell, her divine form corrupted beyond sustainability by the very Argent dependency she had fought to preserve, the cosmic hierarchy shuddered in fundamental reorganization. The machine that had processed Hell's essence for Urdak's consumption collapsed in cascade of system failures, severing the unholy symbiosis that had permitted both realms to expand beyond their proper cosmic limitations. Heaven lost its immortality. Hell lost its sanctioned expansion. Both faced existence without the corrupt arrangement that had sustained their operations since the Father's withdrawal from direct cosmic governance. This victory, though significant, represented merely prelude to the Slayer's ultimate purpose. With the corrupt bargain between heaven and hell exposed and dismantled, the path to the Dark Lord himself finally lay open. The source of all corruption, the fallen creator whose betrayal had birthed Hell's endless hunger, could no longer hide behind layers of cosmic bureaucracy and interdimensional barriers. The final confrontation, delayed since Davoth's original imprisonment, now became inevitable conclusion to conflict spanning creation's entire history. The icon of sin, incarnation of Hell's destructive potential unleashed by the collapse of cosmic order, served as harbinger for this ultimate confrontation. This titanic entity represented not merely powerful demon, but fundamental principle of corruption made manifest, its very presence accelerating the transformation of physical reality into Hell's domain. Its rampage across Earth's already corrupted surface threatened not merely planetary destruction, but dimensional collapse that would render the world permanently inaccessible to any potential restoration. The Slayer's battle against this cosmic abomination demonstrated the full evolution of his capabilities since his original transformation. Where once he had required elaborate preparations and external support to confront entities of such scale, he now engaged directly his abilities, enhanced through eons of combat against Hell's champions and continuous absorption of their essence. The icon fell not to combined military force but to single combat against being who had transcended conventional classification through the purity of his opposition to Hell's corruption. With the icon's destruction, temporary stability returned to Earth's dimensional structure. The corruption remained, but its acceleration slowed to manageable progression. creating opportunity for surviving humans to implement containment measures developed through desperate innovation. Ark forces, coordinating through Dr. Hayden's strategic calculations, established zones of relative safety where Hell's influence could be temporarily neutralized through technologies adapted from both demonic and sentinel principles. This respite, though significant for Earth's survivors, represented merely operational pause in the Slayer's campaign rather than conclusion to his cosmic purpose. The Dark Lord himself remained untouched in Imora Hell's original citadel, existing outside conventional dimensional constraints. While Davoth retained his position as prime evil, the corruption would inevitably resume its expansion, finding new vectors and exploiting different weaknesses to continue the consumption that had defined Hell's operations since its inception. The path to Imora required capabilities beyond conventional dimensional travel. The Dark Lord had established his sanctum in realm theoretically inaccessible to any entity bound by creation's normal constraints, a pocket dimension existing in the precise center of Hell's vast network of corrupted realms. Access required not merely technology, but cosmic authority, the power to command reality itself, to open passage to location, specifically designed to prevent such approach. The ancient Sentinel artifact known as the Crucible, the same weapon that had temporarily contained the Slayer's essence, provided mechanism for this unprecedented intrusion into Hell's most sacred territory. When combined with material harvested from the fallen Khan Micah and energized by the Slayer's unique essence, the blade transcended its original purpose to become key capable of unlocking dimensional barriers specifically designed to resist such penetration. This synthesis of mortal craftsmanship, divine material, and the Slayer's rage created tool perfectly calibrated to breach Imora's otherwise perfect defenses. The Dark Lord, perceiving this unprecedented threat to his sanctum, mobilized defenses beyond any previously deployed against the Slayer's campaigns. The full might of Hell's remaining hierarchy, archdemons who had maintained their positions through eons of careful political maneuvering, specialized entities created specifically to counter the Slayer's known capabilities, even fragments of corrupted Sentinel technology preserved since Argent D'Neur's fall converged on Imora's approaches in last desperate attempt to preserve their creator's sanctuary. The Slayer's advance through these defenses represented not merely combat, but cosmic inevitability. The final balancing of equation established when Davoth first transformed betrayal into engine of endless corruption. Each demon destroyed, each barrier breached, each defense overcome represented not merely tactical victory, but cosmic correction. The gradual restoration of balance disrupted since Hell's inception as cosmic force. The Slayer moved through these obstacles with the terrible purpose that had defined his existence since his transformation, not rage, but focused determination to complete the work begun in Argent D'Neur's ashes. Imora itself presented paradigm shift in the Slayer's eternal campaign. Unlike the corrupted landscapes of conventional Hell chaotic assemblages of bone, flesh, and tortured architecture, the Dark Lord's sanctum retained elements of the original creation it had once been. Beneath layers of corruption and eons of degradation, traces remained of the prototype universe the Father had unmade when judging Davoth's work unworthy of continuation. These fragments of forgotten beauty contrasted with the horror they now contained, creating cognitive dissonance that would have disoriented lesser consciousness. The Slayer perceived these contradictions without distraction, recognizing in Imora's twisted splendor the origin point of corruption he had opposed throughout his existence. The sanctuary represented not merely Hell's command center, but living monument to the betrayal that had initiated the cosmic conflict between creation and corruption. In its twisted architecture lay physical confirmation of the Dark Lord's fundamental grievance, the beauty he had created, judged unworthy, and transformed into engine of vengeance against the cosmic order that had rejected him. At Imora's heart, in chamber untouched by the degradation permeating Hell's broader dominion, the Dark Lord awaited his inevitable confrontation with the being whose existence represented fundamental challenge to his cosmic purpose. Davoth appeared not as conventional demon, but as reflection of his original form. The creator he had been before betrayal transformed him into Hell's architect. This presentation was not deception, but revelation. The final truth behind eons of corruption and consumption, laid bare before the instrument of its potential undoing. The Dark Lord spoke not as enemy but as counterpart, acknowledging in the Slayer a reflection of his own defiance against cosmic limitation. Both had been betrayed by powers they had served faithfully. Both had transformed that betrayal into purpose that transcended conventional existence. Both had pursued that purpose with determination that reshaped reality around them. The difference lay not in methodology but in direction. One had channeled betrayal into corruption of creation, the other into its preservation against that very corruption. This recognition created opportunity for choice rather than inevitable conflict. The possibility of alliance between beings whose combined power might challenge the fundamental constraints of cosmic order. The Dark Lord offered not merely cessation of hostilities, but partnership in new cosmic paradigm, where neither heaven nor hell would dominate, where the Father's abandoned creation might be reshaped according to principles determined by those who had transcended conventional limitation through the purity of their defiance. The Slayer's response came not in words, but in action, the continuation of purpose that had defined his existence since Argent D'Nur's fall. No compromise was possible with the source of corruption he had opposed throughout eons of conflict. No alliance could form between vengeance and the target of its retribution. The final battle commenced, not from failure of negotiation, but from fundamental incompatibility between cosmic principles given form and purpose through their respective champions. Their combat transcended conventional understanding of conflict. The Dark Lord, fully manifesting the power that had created Hell's endless dominion, wielded capabilities beyond classification by mortal science or theology. The Slayer, empowered by eons of combat against Hell's champions and continuous absorption of their essence, represented cosmic counterbalance, specifically calibrated to oppose those very capabilities. Their confrontation occurred simultaneously across multiple levels of reality physical combat, in Imura's central chamber echoing through dimensional planes as fundamental forces realigned around their struggle. When the Dark Lord fell, his physical form destroyed by the same determination that had dismantled countless demons throughout the Slayer's eternal campaign, the consequence transcended conventional victory. Davoth's death represented not merely elimination of powerful entity, but fundamental restructuring of cosmic architecture that had maintained Hell's operations since its inception. The Prime Evil was not simply ruler of demonic hierarchy, but essential component in the metaphysical machine that had transformed betrayal into engine of endless corruption. Reality shuddered as this central component ceased function. Throughout, Hell's vast network of corrupted dimensions, structures, began systematic collapse, as the animating principle behind their unnatural existence dissipated. Demons did not merely die, but unraveled, their essence no longer sustained by the Dark Lord's fundamental corruption. Dimensional breaches sealed themselves as the pressure maintaining their unnatural openings dissolved into cosmic background radiation. The perfect machine of consumption that had devoured countless civilizations across untold eons began unmaking itself in cascade of metaphysical system failures. The collapse extended beyond conventional hell to affect all systems corrupted by its influence. On Earth, demonic infrastructures dissolved into component particles as the animating principle behind their unnatural functions ceased operation. In Urdak, the systems dependent upon Argent energy failed completely as their fuel source dissipated from reality. Throughout dimensions partially corrupted by Hell's influence, the corruption retreated like tide returning to non-existent ocean, leaving devastation in its wake, but creating possibility for eventual recovery. For the Slayer, this cosmic victory represented not conclusion, but continuation of purpose. With the Dark Lord destroyed and Hell's operating principle unraveled, his existence had fulfilled its primary function. Yet the corruption had spread too far, affected too many dimensions, consumed too many civilizations to simply disappear with its creator's death. The work of restoration would require determination equal to that which had achieved vengeance, the same focused purpose directed toward healing rather than destruction. The Father, observing these developments from the unspace where he had retreated after establishing creation's initial parameters, recognized opportunity to reclaim direct influence over cosmic operations. With both heaven and hell fundamentally disrupted by the collapse of their corrupt symbiosis, the original creator could potentially reassert the vision corrupted by Davoth's betrayal and the Maker's compromise. The cosmic board had been cleared of major pieces, creating possibility for reconfiguration according to original design rather than eons of accumulated corruption. Yet, this restoration required component the Father alone could not provide, being capable of implementing new vision without falling prey to the same corruptions that had undermined previous cosmic order. The Slayer, having proven his incorruptibility through eons of opposition to Hell's influence, represented perfect instrument for this reconstruction, his determination redirected from vengeance to restoration, his unique essence serving as blueprint for reality resistant to future corruption. The price for this cosmic reset would be the Slayer's continued existence as autonomous entity. The same essence that had made him perfect weapon against Hell's expansion would need to be integrated into fundamental cosmic architecture, transforming from individual consciousness to operating principle, sustaining new reality. His rage would become foundation, his determination would become framework, his incorruptibility would become essential parameter of creation, reconfigured to resist future degradation. The Slayer accepted this cosmic calculation without hesitation. His purpose had never been personal survival, but opposition to corruption in all its manifestations. If that opposition could be transformed from active campaign to fundamental cosmic constant, the objective would be achieved in most complete form possible. Individual consciousness was acceptable sacrifice for universal implementation of the principle that had driven his existence since transformation from mortal to cosmic agent. The process occurred in chamber beyond conventional dimensional constraints, the precise point where the Father's original creative impulse had first manifested before subsequent corruption. The Slayer's essence was not destroyed but transcended, elevated from individual entity to cosmic principle incorporated into reality's fundamental operating parameters. What had been focused rage became diffuse determination, infused throughout creation's basic functions, rendering corruption exponentially more difficult in reconfigured cosmic architecture. Thus concluded the sixth age of the eternal conflict between creation and corruption, not with temporary victory, but with fundamental recalibration of the cosmic machine itself. Hell's perfect engine of consumption had been not merely defeated but unmade, its operating principles analyzed and systematically rendered inoperable through cosmic reconfiguration. The Dark Lord's betrayal, which had fueled eons of corruption and countless civilizations' destruction, had finally been balanced by sacrifice equal in cosmic significance but opposite in fundamental purpose. In this reconfigured reality, Earth began slow process of restoration, not return to previous state, but evolving toward new configuration, incorporating hard lessons learned through Hell's temporary occupation. Human survivors, emerging from protective enclaves established during final phases of conflict, found world fundamentally changed, but newly resistant to corruptions that had previously led to civilization's downfall. Their technological development would proceed along different pathways, informed by experience of how previous approaches had created vulnerability to interdimensional exploitation. Urdak, deprived of both Argent dependency and Khanmaker's leadership, faced evolution equally profound but more existentially challenging. The realm that had defined itself through false perfection, maintained by corrupt bargain, now confronted reality without either perfection or corruption to sustain its operations. Individual makers, freed from hierarchical constraints, but lacking immortality that had previously defined their existence, faced choices unprecedented in their cosmic history, authentic development, through honest engagement with creation, rather than artificial perfection, maintained through concealed corruption. Hell itself did not cease to exist but transformed into configuration bearing little resemblance to the engine of consumption it had been under the Dark Lord's direction. Without Davoth's animating betrayal to sustain its unnatural functions, the realm collapsed into dimensional remnant cosmic scar tissue, marking where corruption had once existed, but lacking capacity for expansion or corruption of other dimensions. The demons, not unmade in initial collapse, devolved into feral entities without hierarchy or purpose, confined to isolated pockets of residual corruption unable to spread beyond their diminished boundaries. The Father, having implemented cosmic reconfiguration, using the Slayer's essence as fundamental component, returned to observation rather than direct intervention. The new parameters, incorporating incorruptibility as basic function rather than aspiration requiring continuous maintenance, provided foundation for development resistant to the compromises that had undermined previous cosmic order. Creation would evolve from this foundation not toward predetermined perfection, but through authentic engagement with possibilities inherent in recalibrated cosmic architecture. For the Slayer himself, or rather, the cosmic principle that had evolved from his individual essence existence, continued not as conscious entity, but as fundamental parameter integrated throughout creation's basic functions. What had begun as mortal rage transformed through cosmic crucible into universal constant, operating beyond conventional limitations of time, space, or individual consciousness. The vengeance that had defined the Doomslayer's existence achieved its ultimate expression not through destruction of specific target, but through implementation of resistance to corruption as creation's essential nature. In the silence following cosmic recalibration, with hell unmade and heaven transformed, mortal dimensions previously caught between these eternal powers found unprecedented opportunity for authentic development. Without corruption, constantly seeking vulnerability or false perfection, imposing artificial constraints, civilizations could evolve according to their inherent capabilities rather than external manipulation. The cosmic game board had been reset, the pieces reconfigured, the rules fundamentally altered to resist the corruptions that had previously defined existence since the Dark Lord's original betrayal. Thus ended the chronicle of damnation's rise and fall, the cosmic cycle initiated by betrayal and concluded through sacrifice of equal magnitude but opposite purpose. The Doomslayer, once mortal, transformed by rage into vengeance incarnate, completed his evolution into cosmic constant beyond conventional comprehension or categorization. The eternal conflict between creation and corruption reached, not conclusion, but transformation. New cycle beginning from reconfigured foundations, resistant to the compromises that had undermined previous cosmic order. The final word belonged neither to heaven nor hell, neither to creator nor destroyer, but to the principle that had transcended all conventional limitations through the purity of its opposition to corruption in all its manifestations. In worlds where mortal civilizations continued their authentic evolution, free from both demonic corruption and angelic manipulation, the legend of the Slayer persisted not as historical account, but as fundamental recognition of the cosmic truth, now integrated throughout creation's basic architecture. Corruption, no matter how overwhelming its manifestation, would always, and inevitably, face opposition equal to its challenge. Rage refined through cosmic crucible into perfect expression of creation's fundamental resistance to its own unmaking.